In the open space, there was a ship on which screams for help were heard, and people shouted that it was going to them and wanted to destroy them. People did not lose hope, and hoped that at least someone would come to their aid and save them because none of them wanted to go to the next world. For all soldiers who was on board, a team was given that they all need to gather on the captain's bridge and do it as soon as possible. The team was repeated again for those who may not hear and disobey this order they could not. One of the soldiers did not agree with the decision of his captain, and his comrade is not the same way to go further. The man said that he does not know how they can simply surround the prayer for help from people, and therefore it was decided to move on in accordance with the plan. He gave everyone an order that they should save as many people as possible, and his soldiers were ready to begin to fulfill the order. The men heard how the voice of a man sounded in one of the compartments, who called someone and asked him to save. Military cosmonauts hurried where a voice was heard from, where and hoped that they would be able to help anyone. The fact that they appeared in the next compartment plunged them simply in shock because no one was ready for such a picture. Nearby were people with each other and almost all of them were already armed. One of the men was so shocked that he simply froze and could not move, and then his comrade immediately appeared in him since they could not afford this weakness. Any man said that he would track the movement, and they ordered them to find the survivors as soon as possible. The soldier suddenly heard this voice who used to call for help, but could not understand where this man was. This man with great difficulty stuck out his dark hand of the highest quality in his place, and asked to pull it out. The man asked this convict to tolerate very little, and gave him that they would surely pull him out. When they managed to at least get a little closer to this kingdom, they were not waiting for the best surprise from what the monster found there. The soldiers did not expect this, and in the first minutes they were simply confused because they did not know what to do next. The monster was respected and destroyed everyone who came to him in the way without sparing anyone. The soldiers were given a team to immediately open fire and destroy this monster as soon as possible. The creature was dexterous and fast, and tried to dodge the fire that was a warrior cosmonaut. The soldiers still managed to hurt the monster, and this was even more angry, and he was going to answer everyone who did it. The monster grinned and rose to the whole height that showed people with whom they dealt with. The monster decided to use its secret arsenal, and therefore plussed people with liquid, but only it was unusual. It was an acid that corroded all that came into contact and hit one of the soldiers. The comrade was in a hurry to this soldier and ordered to calm down first and then immediately introduced the antidote. A man fell under an arms attack and this brought him out of the rut, and he dropped his machine gun. The man could not resist his feet and fell to the ground, but at the same time tried to find a solution. Though with great difficulty, a soldier was still able to open his eyes to appreciate the situation around. The picture was not rainbow since he, as a creature, was breaking up with his comrade. He was in despair due to the fact that he did not know how to help a comrade, because he himself was not in the best shape now. The man remembered that under him suddenly appeared an outstanding certain sphere, which was the owner of an explosive device. The monster was not himself, and he acted in the company of his friend of the amoeba bubble, and it was this amoeba that warned the monster about the danger. The creature gave a certain team of the bubble and he hastened to calibrate it, but for this he needed to match the man as close as possible. Amoeba was all ready for its own purposes, and in front of the soldier appeared in its size. After a few moments, Amoeba absorbed a person and, in the end of it, there was no chance to escape. After this monster decided to bring the soldier, he had begun to the end, and that light was sent the most strict condition without any chance of salvation. The creature reunited with their so-called comrade, and they both went to the neighboring internal compartment of the core. The monster saw that the door ahead was blocked, and therefore he decided to use the seal of one of the soldiers. Amoeba decided to help her friend and therefore reminded of the influence of an explosive source. The monster thought that this was not a bad idea, and since he did not have other options, he decided to take advantage of this advice. The creature threw the sphere to the closed door and he hid behind the wall and watched the explosion through observation. After the fire subsided a bit and cleared the path so that the monster left its shelters and went on, several frightened people entered this compartment, and after they discovered exactly who granted this even more, one of the men so unexpectedly appeared a monster that shouted without a stop, hoping that at least someone would come to him and save him. From wild confidence in his eyes, it was possible to grin the monster who did not bode well for this person. This monster was a hostile alien creature of which no one spared who attacked him in the way. The monster continued to destroy everything, and thanks to this endless stress, in the middle of the immense universe in the cargo compartment of the metal ship, he was forced to admit that he became a hostile alien creature in a science fiction game for survival called Space Survivor. RPG was a survival game in which one of the existing races could be selected and also take into account the world and scale. It was possible to choose and become a metallic gremlin that destroys the spaceships of people. There was an opportunity to become a monster mutant who, thanks to his mutations, could become more and more. It was also possible to choose and become the leader of the colony, with a collective mind that destroys enemies in ground attacks and attacks entire planets. He played for all creatures that could appear only in nightmares. However, he was one race that most of all, this is an unidentified aggressive cosmic morph, or UAS. The player was called this creature Amorph, and when creating it, the developers were inspired by the creature from the 20th film. It was the race that could constantly evolve due to the genes of its victims. At first, this monster could be called iMob. However, it was the worst in the game, due to the inability to contact other races and low vitality. The reason why the player chose this monster with his beloved character was very simple, since the amorphous was so the creature could manifest itself and become stronger in accordance with the choice and will of the player himself. The system device that this race was an unidentified ampless space morph in a state of childhood. His goal was to survive, and he had a psychic perception. The amorphous read about all this in the system window, and all this carefully taught to understand who and what he is. The monster realized that as a result, he became this kind, and now it was necessary to adapt to such changes. Of course, the character XX has great opportunities and abilities, and he could not like the player. He still decided for himself that you should not particularly worry about this, and already under the investigation what is. After a few moments, the amorphous simply fell to the ground and began to wriggle because he was captivated by his attention. He could never have thought that discarding the skin could lead to such independent dynamics and discomfort. The amorphous, a little tormented with attention, decided for himself that now he should definitely have a bite to eat, otherwise his hungry does not give common sense. Having appreciated his appearance at the moment and looking at his form, he more resembled a mega corporation or a star alliance. If they found out about him, that they would immediately eliminate this in this. The amorphous involved an extrasensory perception to examine everything around and not miss anything important. The monster closed his eyes and at that moment looked very strange. In a few long minutes of his inspection, he was still able to find what is important for himself. The monster headed towards the container he needed and was glad after he found out that he was in the password. The creature was very surprised when he began to miss the input of the code for unlock due to the fact that the cipher was too simple. A few minutes later, he got access to the box in which the bars were stored and began to follow them. He had such a feeling as if he was chewing an eraser, but on the other hand, the problem with the replenishment of nutrients was solved. The monster suddenly drew attention to the insect that drove nearby, and it turned out that it was a cockroach. He hastened to catch him, and everything went successfully. The amorphous decided to enjoy his broken prey, and it turned out to be very tasty for him. And so at the same moment, he received that the saturation effect was activated, and the essence of the wing's gene was obtained. It was a biological form of a cockroach. The amorphous was surprised that he managed to get a form so quickly, since the essence of the gene was a key factor in the play for the morph. As various genes occurred, it was possible to evolve into a stronger creature. The creature saw that now it was endowed with wings, and this is very good news. His body at that moment began to deform slightly, and all because his wings were cut through. The monster, of course, was glad of all this, only now he did not know how I use it. He decided for himself that since the wings limit his back, and according to the logic of things, he needed to move the trapezoidal muscle. After several unsuccessful failures, he still succeeded, and the monster took advantage of his wings and took off. The amorphous, after he finally established himself that he was flying now without problems again, decided to reinforce these wooden bars because his strength was faster than he thought. He remembered another video of his nutrition, and after a while he was able to track them down. Only a cockroach was no longer alone, and this monster could not but please. Amorph, to ensure the maximum effect of the wings, he needs to get something else. The first goal was successfully folded, and it turned out to be much easier than he imagined. The monster, after absorbed his 20th, was surprised that nothing was offended and did not feel any result. The creature even compared its length with a silky roe, since the tastes were the same according to his sensation. After a while, he still received a chitonic shell, and it was his so-called protection. Protect his names as it developed, and it was a good ability, but he knew that there was still a lot of things to do. The amorphous realized that in order to survive, it was necessary to achieve survival, and this was a little more difficult to do. The survivability of this characteristic was that the aging slowed down due to a decrease in energy consumption. He knew that it was a passive ability that manifested itself in plants and this ability to limit the need for food. The amorphous is so that if he wants and further exists, then his pandemic will continue to catch cockroaches. The creature decided for himself that it was time for him to change the location, since there was no one to hunt here. The monster decided not to spend a lot of time replacing the location, and therefore took advantage of his wings, so that this significantly saved his time. Flying, he noticed several more internets below, and already knew that this was his prey with which he in the near future to enjoy. While he caught one cockroach the second, he took advantage of the moment, and quickly decided to run away. The Amorphous was not going to take his side so easily and hurried after him, trying to catch up and catch it until he finally disappeared. The monster, because he scored a decent speed, and therefore could not come in time, and crashed into metal containers. The cockroach was many times smaller in size, and therefore with dexterity, he jumped out between the cadaveric containers. The Amorphous itself could not do this. The monster tried to quickly come up with a plan for himself to capture his prey that he really needed. He was still a probe of his finger to seep in the insides and catch a runaway insect and destroy it. The Amorphous received that he had an activation effect, and it was good news. In the end, he was still able to get the essence of the gene of living honor, and was able to create a biological form of the creature of a cockroach. He was displayed by the question whether he wanted to lose liveliness, and of course, his answer was obvious. The monster knew that people on the ship on his enemies heard steps behind the wall, feeling the vibration. He understood that there was little time to avoid a terrible future. Therefore, it should pump as soon as possible. In order to do this, he needed to go beyond this cargo compartment. The monster was configured by understanding, and that it was time for him to get out of the house, and there was no opportunity to open it anymore for this. The monster already knew the answer to the question of where to go after the cargo compartment that he did in the end. The Amorphous decided that he needs to send a located next to the reactor to the refrigerator. It was an extreme object, and therefore visitors will be a little there, and in this way it wanted to lurk under a dark lamp. The monster that if suddenly it doesn't work out, then it will be possible to break the reactor along with the refrigerator and immediately run away after that. Significantly look into the ventilation chamber to make sure that his path is clean and nothing threatens him. He slowly but confidently moved forward, and was very wary of listening to any rustle and sounds. It was not very easy for him to go this path, since the entire surface of this mine was metal, and, appropriately, very hard. The monster tried to unscrew his adhesive nut on the fan so that it could be moved on. After some time, he still managed to remove the grate with the fan, and he went on to his goal. If he somehow damages the fans, then artificial intelligence will definitely report on the trouble of people. This indicates that he had no other choice but to go through it. The monster decided for himself that the right time to rely on the ability of an Amorphous, because he simply did not have another choice. He used his abilities and was able to feel that iron oxide and fine metal dust hung in the air. The Amorphous observation of the fan's operation noted that the hinge blades almost wear out, and therefore in some places it moves back. He waited for the right moment, and only after he received the information he needed. His flare suggested that it was necessary to jump right at that moment. The monster did so, and he still succeeded, and at the same time the most important thing remained intact and unharmed. The Amorphous overcoming this leads to such a test that it is impossible to approach it and therefore keep your path further. On the way, he noticed that there are also spiders. It is suitable in order to put an end to this ventilation shaft and hear the voices of people. At that moment, one of these people was interested in conducting an experiment at number 26. The answer that this person was given, that unfortunately the next failure occurred, and he will again fly from his boss. One of the men said that their boss was with the ground, and in this situation even the captain could not help anything. By upset, they decided that today it is already worth finishing. The monster was surprised since there was a laboratory in front of him, and he initially thought that it was just delivery. Judging by the appearance of people, he concluded that this is all the same mega corporation. Mega Corporation is a group of people who flourished in the solar system, more precisely, if other words, then it was a race created on the basis of Earthling. In most options, management was not the government of a large corporation. The members of these corporations were terrible materialists, despite the fact that the game had quite a lot of human races that mainly had neutral status. Among all these corporations, Megacorp was the most hostile. Mega Corporation was an internal race that turned ordinary people into slaves. The monster took care that since they were in the game, it means that in reality, they were the same. The monster used his wings to look around faster and understand that you are coming. He took advantage of the abilities of Amorph, including because, depending on what it was for a spaceship, his course could change. The monster knew that in the research center for the study of hacks, he created a soldier of mutants who had a solid body and specialized in ground venues. The research center also created Kolotov, and so-called the cosmic elves that were endowed with powerful psychics. He personally would prefer classes with stabs. However, to get the mental ability in the first place would not be very reasonable. The monster suddenly heard a voice that called for help and repeated it from time to time when without ceasing. He went to the reservoir in the presence of the inhabitants of different countries, and now one of them said how it hurt him and asked for help. The monster recognized the calling of the amoeba called the calling to the rescue, and he remembered that for this monster there was an oxygen storage. It was the most useless ability for Amorphous. The Amorphous decided to look for tips with the help of his psychic perception. The monster discovered that the amoeba bubble was connected to electric current, and now I realized what two men were talking about. He found several buttons next to this tank, and he prompted him a little that the button on one of these buttons would help him choose an experiment. The monster entered, and after a moment he heard the words of gratitude addressed to him. This indicates that not everything was lost, and the bubble amiibo could still be saved from vegan weapon. Very little time passed when the amorphous heard a certain noise and realized that people were heading to the laboratory, and he hastened to close so that they could not determine it. The girl with a cat in her arms entered the laboratory, and one of the scientists hurried behind her. She asked him when the same test subject under the number of 26 results, and heard that they had already received an answer from him, but they needed a little more time. She said that time is lost money, and it is necessary to make a removal to the provision point to report on the work done. The girl warned the scientists that if they do not achieve results, the company can reconsider its decision to work with them. She looked very seriously and menacingly at her employee, and made it clear to her with all her appearance that it was better for her to follow her instructions, otherwise they will be waited for great troubles. The man, who was a senior solid employee, and his name was Addie Wayne, confidently looking at the girl. The girl said that of course, she was also not satisfied with such an outcome, and therefore she has high hopes for her senior researcher. She said that if all the same he manages to apply this ability from the subject at number 6, then it will definitely wait for him. The girl decided that if everything goes well, they will be able to establish a connection with Mars. She said that all this is real, and possibly because that side was very interested in this project, and therefore they should not miss this opportunity. A researcher asked the girl what was known about the injection of the psionium. She stood over this since psionia was a remedy that developed a star alliance, and this tool aroused abilities. Addie Way warned her that they had not yet worked with this washing. He said that in fact there were several more studies and they had already tried everything with a similar composition. The girl realized that only this psionia was stable. The girl decided that in this case they needed to take this dose right now, and there was no point in waiting anymore. The scientist warned her that if the nutrionist of the subject could not be introduced, could be at risk. She did not want to hear anything and threatened the fact that the results of the research had to leave her on the table. The man said that only he hopes that she understands the whole seriousness of this situation. The researcher hastened to immediately begin to fulfill this order of the standard, without preserving the anger of his boss. To begin with, it was decided to start with a minimum dose of this drug, but the girl ordered it to be increased. They both determined that after the introduction of this drug there was immediately a reaction, but an old man who should stop there. The girl said that once there is an answer, then the dose can be increased and ordered to enter everything that remains. The senior researcher doubted the correctness of his decisions, and then the girl ordered him to go aside and did everything herself. The drug immediately entered into force, and the amoeba bubbles began to ask to stop the action due to the fact that it was uneasy. The girl saw the answer and was very glad and could not even stand the victorious smile on her face. The amorph all this time watched what was happening on the side and was dissatisfied with what happened here. The girl from the United States answered very interestingly and ordered her employee to continue the experiment with the subject of 26. The man doubted that everything would be in order if they continue, and the girl convinced him and ordered her to inform her how the results would appear. The girl was about to leave, but how she thought that she was following her from the side, but looking back, she did not notice anything suspicious. The amorphous lurked in his shelter and regretted that at that moment when the bubbles of the amoeba asked him for help, he could not do anything. The monster considered the whole situation of this very annoying, and he did not like all this much, and then he made the same decision for himself. The amorph decided that he had not sent this girl to the next world and did it a few days later. The monster moved to one of the compartments where there were continuous metal pipes that passed through the entire ship and connected in one place along the entire length. He decided to do something, and for this he needed one of his sides, and it was poison. Having done this manipulation, he was satisfied, and that it was possible to begin to predict his plan. The monster closed his eyes, and after concentrated thanks to his capabilities, he was able to see the whole ship. According to his opinion, in order to win the necessary information to win, it was necessary to know where his rivals are and what they did, and all this now he can get through the liquid which the pipes were coated. On the 4th day after contacting the amorph, he finally created a nest for himself, and, after the construction of the refuge, the monster moved only between the nest and the cargo compartment, also ate cockroaches and spiders. He still spied on enemies and collected information. The monster found that woman was called Eugene Kisaragi, and noticed that today she went at the same time. He was responsible for the fact that this Eugene Kisaragi was the head of the research group, and despite her poor health, she had to observe the conditions for a person on this ship, and was also a thunderstorm for the monster itself. A few days ago, they had an experimental incident, and due to this all arrived in confusion. The girl was collected and was able to create a special tracking device and as a result caught the subject in just 2 hours. The monster is the same, that if the experimental person decided to go through ventilation, then he would be in danger and therefore he had to destroy Eugene as soon as possible. Eugene suddenly turned sharply and began to carefully look around and something or someone. She again felt whose gaze, and it was very strange, since the girl did not leave the feeling that someone was watching her. Warriors of the astronauts accompanying the girl noticed her anxiety and asked what was the matter and how they could help. The monster moved away from the grate and tried to behave because no one could explain his whereabouts. An amorphous hairstyle that was too well developed for a girl, and he should be more careful with this. He still suggested that perhaps Eugene also has psychic abilities. The psychic abilities that were recognized by the racial of cults, or other words, it was a force similar to television and control over the mind. Among people, personalities were very rarely born with congenital psychic potential. The monster that was, regardless of whether Eugene had talent or not, but she is definitely very smart and sensitive to what is happening around, and there were always armed Jews, armed soldiers near her. The amorphous thinks everything the same as he approaches her. The amorphous saw in the system window that he had a new ability, and it was paralyzing regret. He believed that it was an ideal characteristic for such a weak monster as he. The monster learned that only 1 drop of this sting was capable of paralyzing an adult. The effect of this entire action, of course, lasted only 5 minutes, but this was quite enough. The amorph knew that in order to use his sting, he should be in unity with his goal. The achievement of this goal was quite difficult since the soldiers were always there. The monster understood that he would hardly have found any solution if he just thought about it. Therefore, he decided that it was time to start acting and it was time to change the situation. The amorphous tried to move quietly and silently so as not to inadvertently get into people's eyes. The monster went to the amoeba and carefully began to examine him and gave him the bubble what was glad to see Amor. The amorphous noted that the bubbles of amoeba look much better than yesterday, and the monster said that there were still such hotels. The monster crushed his club and began to pour it into a special hole connected to an amuya. All these pieces began to go to the bubble, and this was very tasty and nutritious for him. The amoeba was very pleased and grateful for such guests, and outwardly even shone a little. He remembered that in the game Ameb did not have any special abilities. However, this person was different. The monster suddenly remembered that that woman was always nearby, and it could be a good clue. This could only lead to the fact that Eugene was configured against any independent regulation, and if her cat goes to the other world, the woman will become more vulnerable. Please note that the cat has never been guarded as Kisarags, with the exception of course, those moments when the hostess did not call a pet so that he was left alone. The amorphous for himself already decided everything, namely that he uses this cat as a bait. The monster recalled that the cat seemed to be called Caesar, and this cat behaved like a real emperor. The cat at that moment lay not far and felt very confident and relaxed. Please note that every day the boiler is high-quality meat, and this could mean that it weighed a lot. The judge around the world, Eugene Kisaragi, was an unusual person. Amorphia was considered a cat a stupid creature and therefore was sure that it would be easy to destroy it, but the monster could not do it right here. The monster looked at the ventilation shaft, which looked quite usually. However, if you look at it using extrasensory observation, you could see a laser grid. He should only touch her as artificial intelligence to immediately notify people about the threat, and it was such a term dead end. Suddenly, the same cat heard some strange sound and hurried to that place where this sound came from. The cat ran to the bars from behind which the monster lurked and put his face everywhere, and thereby discovered in the found area of the amorphous. The animal tried to remove the grate that served as an obstacle between them with her paws. The soldiers passed by hearing a noise and hastened to find out what the same heart in the room. They joined the inside, and how the cat began to push the grate that covered ventilation with their paws. The soldiers examined everything around and did not reveal any threat, except the enraged by the cat who decided not to attach this. The monster tried once again, not even the light to not give himself out, and was very glad that nothing happened. The amorphous is not comparable with how I could make such a stupid mistake, and, due to excitement, I almost lost my mind from what attracted the attention of the tail. The monster stopped suddenly, and one thought came to his mind that was very useful. He was obviously bored behind the cat, and it was the monster only on his hand. After that, the monster took care of himself and continued to act as a stimulus. The security was the final link in its scheme of a more accurate response to this guard. The monster smiled at a malevolent smile and already realized how he managed to fulfill his planned plan. Coddled on his litter, when suddenly his attention again attracted some kind of noise. The noise came from somewhere from above from the ventilation shaft, and the cat curiosity won. He went to the bars and looked inside, seeing the insect layer inside, and to be more precise, then it was a cockroach. The cat's gaze sparkled directly since he had already seen his goal ahead that was still his prey. The cat began to speak with his paws with a grate, so that he had the opportunity to get to his prey. He was very stubborn, and after a while the cat still managed to squeeze out the lattice, and thereby he discovered access. The soldiers again heard a notification, but they decided that it was all the same cat, and let their signal annoying, but they decided to look at him a little later. They were sure that the cat would not go anywhere because they are guarding him. The cat at that time was already inside the ventilation pipe, and apparently headed for its prey. The insect turned out to be more than one, and the cat is not suspicious about anything moved along a certain labyrinth after all the cockroaches that came across him in the way. After a while, this very cat realized that he was lost and could no longer find the way back. A few minutes later, he got out of this labyrinth, not where exactly he was, and was slightly scared. The cat was distracted because the insect was discovered here immediately attracted his attention. The monster at that moment, unexpectedly for the cat himself, threw himself on the attack, and did it very quickly. The cat could not during the time to react and evade this blow, and for a moment, the destruction of the monster was for a moment. The monster was pleased that his plan was realized, and still in a state of production was very tasty. After some time, Eugene ran along the corridor, who scared all the employees with her appearance. The woman, not paying attention to anyone, flew into the cabinet to the captain, and immediately went to him. She looked very excited, and the captain immediately shared her at one time. The woman wanted to know when she could see her cat Caesar, to which the captain answered her that the soldiers are looking for him, but it is necessary to wait a little more. Eugene began to shout that more than 2 hours had already passed, and she was no longer going to wait a minute. The woman shouted that her cat Caesar had a very strict diet, and she suspects that most likely something happened to him. The captain turned to a woman who became the head of the research group and said that he perfectly understood her, but recalled that they were attacking the ship. He added that if her cat did not start on the rescue module, then he should be somewhere on the ship, and there are no more other options. The woman said this is why they immediately had to find him. The captain meant that if a woman calms down a little, then the news will not be forced to wait long. The man took care to himself that if this woman had not been from noble capital, he would have put her in the insulator for a long time. She also wanted to know what happened to the guard, to what the captain replied that they were watching in custody, and after they arrived at the point with them. Eugene suddenly told the captain to press the captain immediately, and he was slightly taken aback by such tones and such words. She explained that since the captain of the man of this vessel, accordingly, has a privilege, and therefore he can use it and convey custom conditions, the captain believes that Eugene goes too far. The captain was sure that if the soldiers learn about it, then on the ship it could lead to the fact that these words of a woman got out of themselves, even more than I considered neglect of her misfortune. The man explained that he believes that they will discuss the consequences after the search is completed. Eugene that the captain forgot that it is very important that this incident occurred because the soldiers did not do their work properly. The man tried to smooth out the conflict in this situation and said that he was well understood by her excuse. He promised that in connection with what happened, they would certainly strengthen discipline and would control such moments more. Eugene accepted such an answer and was about to leave, but finally warned the captain that she would definitely return in 2 hours. The woman said also that if they suddenly did not notice the cat after time, it would be much better if the captain himself restores his power. Eugene had already left the captain's office, only then passed his emotions and stupidly hit the table. The man could no longer free himself and tried to understand where this cat Caesar could be coming. All this time the monster was in a ventilation pipe and their conversation was well heard. The fact that he received under the name Natural, only now he did not know what it was. The system of combining characteristics was a system that combined the general characteristic features into one more powerful. He used it so often that he remembered all the possibilities. The monster therefore was speechless after he saw the system. He turned out to be an experienced player, but had never encountered such a characteristic before. The monster saw in the system window that it was clear that it was a natural source of energy. This characteristic could be deduced with a psychic perception, and as a result, a flare of a predator was obtained. Seeing on the site that what could find something in advance, decided to immediately try this opportunity. He noticed that psychic perception became earlier. However, the effect of foresight he did not feel stronger. He most likely was a passive skill that was activated automatically, and most likely he did not work because nothing thought threatened his life. The monster decided for himself that in this case he would definitely try this ability at the first convenient opportunity, and for now he would look better than Eugene did. He expressed the opinion that a woman due to strong experiences has already gone crazy, and it was very similar to the truth. The woman was evil in the fall, and even more evil was that she was leaving too much time for stabilization. The monster looked at her so and thought that this Eugene Kisaragi was from those people, waved only themselves, and usually such as she went crazy when they took something. The amorphous was glad that his goal was achieved, and now the tense atmosphere between Eugene Kisaragi and the soldiers would only intensify. The monster achieved this incident led to serious violations of the norms between them. Firstly, the guards did not like this cat, and they had a reason to get angry at the animal, because the cat was fed high-quality meat 3 times a day. This was the product about which they spoke to the soldiers, and there was nothing to dream about, and this factor already tuned them automatically negatively towards the cat. The monster, who actually thought that hatred was more aimed at the class superiority of this woman. Eugene was a representative of noble capital of the highest level among mega-corporations. The soldiers who forced to do nonsense were afraid to protest against her, and therefore the cat began for them by the fact that they could take out their discontent. In other words, we could say that Caesar played a peculiar role of the shield. The biggest and main asked the question, so, what if this shield suddenly does not become more accurate? The same thing if all the efforts to search for the one whom the soldiers did not like most of all are in vain. No one knew whether it was possible to continue to guard the kitty as before. But now, the head of the research group no longer trusted soldiers, because it was the negligence of the war that caused the consequences of the one who was so dear to her. The Amorph was very grateful to this cat because it was thanks to him that he was able to realize such a wonderful plan in reality. Monsters of theory, that now the time has come to analyze, and the essence of the head of the research group, Eugene Kisaragi. The woman at that moment stood and thought at least how to take her emotions under control, but she didn't do anything. Eugene decided to recoup for someone after experiments, and it was a certain outlet for her. She saw what her behavior led to, and this brought the woman only joy. The woman, let's say, so without his attention was not going to think about something and therefore wanted to figure it out. After some time, the line reached the bubble of the amoeba, and looking at the expression on Eugene's face, it was possible to say for sure that amoeba did not expect anything good. She watched the most insignificant pleasure on this object, especially when she saw how this happened on the amoeba itself. The bubble gave a signal for help, and continuously asked to stop, but no one was going to fulfill his desires and requests. Eugene directed her soul straight, and at least for some time she forgot about her name to her beloved master. The amoeba bubble received discharges over and over again, and it began to seem to him that it never stops. The amorphous all this was hiding in the ventilation chamber of this laboratory, and was angry that he could not help amoeba. The monster tried to understand how it was better for him to do in this situation, but he couldn't think of anything sensibly. He believes that you should no longer waste time on vain and any conversations too. The monster decided that he would not console and simply give what he really needs. The woman came to the captain 2 hours later and wanted to hear what the results were. That she replied that they only started the search. The man asked her to wait a little more, but Eugene interrupted him and turned to him, calling the name Meteor Samuel. Eugene said that this is also that the man refuses victory in the will of noble capital. The man asked the head of the research group to observe the statements, and reminded her that he was the captain of this vessel. The woman shouted that she did not need a big difficulty to leave her captain's chair. The captain said that even when a woman was a representative of the noble capital, she still cannot abuse her powers. He added that he had the full right to take into custody the head of the research group. Eugene was surprised and even shocked by the fact that the captain allows himself to speak out at her address, and threatened with capture. The man told her that the captain of the court was checking any person who observing the order. The whole conversation was heard by the amorph, hiding in a ventilation shaft. The monster observed and noticed that the situation became more and more funny, and he thought that most likely there was a conflict between them, even before its border. Eugene was nervous and did not achieve the desired result from the captain who left his office. The woman was accompanied by 2 military soldiers, and discontent was written on her face. Eugene, passing along the corridor, informed the guys that she needed to go to the restroom, and not expecting the answer to be found there. One of the soldiers decided to take advantage of the repairs and told his comrade that he also went away for a short time. The monster, seeing this whole picture, showed that this is his chance of more simply cannot be. The amorphous already knew that usually one of the guards always followed the woman, but today this did not happen because the military tormented the whole day. It was also shown on his hand that one of the accompanying also excommunicated the restroom, and this is finally that Eugene was left completely alone. The monster was still happy that there were no sensors in the restrooms that could stimulate his movement, and all these factors were established in ideal conditions for the attack. Eugene coasted in the restroom and leaned on the wash basin, thinks at least a little to cope with his sources of energy. The amorphous chance corresponds to the fact that he cannot afford to miss this, and therefore decided to act and first of all untwisted the grate and chose confidence. The woman decided to refresh with the help of water, hoping that it would help her a little. The amorph at this time was already moving along the wall behind her and tried to do it silently. The monster succumbed to poison on the tail, and this showed that it is in full combat support. Eugene, after washed and turned off the water, suddenly heard some incomprehensible noise and hastened to turn around. The monster at that moment realized that he was discovered, and there was nothing more than he had left but to attack. Eugene was very scared and began to scream and call for help, but it was already too late. The Amorphous clasped the woman and tried to tie her to the floor, which in the end he managed to do. The monster was very sympathetic and was going to bring what he had begun to the very end that he would not do it. He did not waste time in vain, and therefore immediately rushed on the attack on the woman, hoping that this attack would be more successful. The monster so managed to achieve its goals and release its poison, which immediately began to spread in its own women. Eugene did not get a simple chance to survive or somehow escape and therefore almost instantly fell to the floor. The monster was as close as possible to the woman and enjoyed her sincere expression on her face. Amorph was very curious what Eugene was at the moment. He was interested in the existence of whether she was afraid that she saw an incomprehensible creature. The monster was still interested in how evil was a woman in a restored situation and was afraid that she would go into the next world. Amorph that in any case it was not especially important because Eugene Kisaragi believed that he would still be destroyed. The monster considered how human blood spread through his body, and at the moment when her genetic information obtained from the blood through the stomach went through the veins and touched the brain, he felt something. One of the monster guesses was true. The fact that he fulfilled the conditions for the evolution of a personality cub, and he was asked a question if he wanted to evolve. The monster was glad to get information that he had the opportunity to evolve. One of the guards heard a noise and hurried to the restroom to check what was happening there. The monster suddenly felt what he felt, and this happened almost with the predator, and now he at least realized how this situation worked. An amorphous idea that, if all this is so soon, here will be a guard Eugene Kisaragi, and he thinks that maybe he would be better off. The monster of the situation realized that he had too little time to escape and therefore decided to start a second time. One of the guards had already approached the restroom and was going to go to her, just did not know that he would be expected there. He slowed down in front of the door and listened to the sounds, and at the same time prepared his weapon. The soldier went all the same in everything, and the whole range of emotions was written on his face with what he saw. He tried to understand that the same thing happened here during such a short period of time. The monster was already ready for attack. The monster jumped to the soldier on his back and tried to sting the man there to eliminate him, and he eventually succeeded. After the monster destroyed the soldier, he hastened to close from this place, and it was necessary to do this as soon as possible. The monster did not know how much time he had before returning that guy, and therefore he simply knew only what needed to be spent. He decided that in case of covering his grave and not to suspect that it was better to walk in circles, and only after that, the monster headed for the nest. After some time, the monster checked the entire district, and everything turned out to be quite safe for him. The amorphous that all moves smoothly and requires time for evolution. After a few moments, the process of a clap of individuals was automatically launched. The monster gradually began to be covered, and this was visible on some layer. This very cover began to harden a little, and this crust was in the whole body of the amorphous. The amorphous felt unusual, and thought that the memories of the embryonic period were likely to look like that. He felt how he became a different creature, and felt that this mucus sculpted something else out of him. The monster really wanted to open his eyes, and all his own eyes, however. Now it was impossible to do it. After he wrapped himself in a cocoon, he automatically lost control of himself. The monster did everything possible, and now he can only wait patiently. After some time, the lid began to break, and the monster itself had already appeared through my mucus. The monster realized that it was time for him to choose from his so-called cocoon. The amorphous began with curiosity to consider all the changes taking place with him. It was just what was worth its death that consisted of many fangs that looked very creepy and dangerous. The monster only came to fear with its appearance, and it also increased significantly in size. The captain asked at the head of the medical brigade established the reason why Eugene went to the next world. The head of the medical brigade replied that the cause of the species was the naked eye, or rather it was established that the head of the research group began that light blow to the neck. The man said that apparently this attack was inflicted by a small saw, but more precisely, he could determine after a thorough examination. A thorough gaze had in mind a complete check, and they were discussing all this at the oval table. The head of the medical brigades did not know how to do the right thing in this situation. The captain grabbed his head because he, too, had no idea what to do now, but he knew for sure that they were waiting for great trouble. The man turned to the head of the security department and asked what was known about the search for the castle. The head of the security department replied that they checked records from all video cameras on the tablet. However, they could not find anything unusual. He also said that they are currently interrogating the guard who was the first to register the suspects. The captain asked the men that he was that guard guilty of this crime. The head of the security department replied that, judging by the proposal of their information, most likely that guard was not guilty. The captain told me immediately to report to him how some results would appear at will. The captain also talked about the fact that all people who gathered in this room were known that this happened in the laboratory some time ago. The person spoke about one of the specialists who gives great hopes and eventually ended up in the test tube due to what the head of the research group listened. If this was a phenomenon for someone who did not listen to the words of a higher leadership, then he did not understand what was then waiting for those who were involved in the destruction of the representative of noble capital. The captain said that if they do not want to be tortured with electric shock, then they should immediately cause countermeasures. One of the men suggested that an accident occurred during the experiment. The captain replied that he was better to think before he decides to say, because Eugene was not any specialist on this ship. He believes that this is some kind of stupidity and probably therefore he is still a representative of average capital. It was before a dish that they had never tried, but the man said that he was not going to take wine for everyone. The head of the technical department also replied that if he thirsts for management so much, let him do it herself. There was a quarrel between the men, and since all the emotions were at the limit, no one could restrain himself. A few minutes later he hit the table with his fist and called everyone to the silence of men. He believes that all their conflicts and disputes only complicate the whole situation and make it worse. The man took up his place and in his own words, he managed to achieve the silence and attention of all men. He turned to the captain and said that they are currently next to the planet with 08. Only the captain himself did not understand how this information was transmitted. The man explained that this planet with 0 was the territory of Space Dog. The captain suggested that he wanted to beat everything as if because of this man and this whole incident occurred. He confirmed and thought that he would give everything so that they would take a surprise attack by surprise, and they still did not determine the degree of damage. The captain listened to the version and tried to comprehend everything thinking about the Space Dog and tried to understand what decision they should make. Space Dog were cosmic pirates who wandered around the universe and were one of the rivals of the Megacorp race and had extensive experience in interflot games. Even batteries managing veterans often cause damage in a collision with pirates. Of all this, it was possible to conclude which part could wait for the researcher by the ship, and it was a bozzle of great damage. On his route, the ship was one with a countless number of unforeseen situations. An American man, if they report about the pirates' attack, they will be able to hush up the technological activity of the head of the research group. The captain was very thinking about this proposal. The captain said that this is a very good plan, but as already known, they will not be able to fight the Space Dog with their weapons. One of the men rose, and all those present informed that he has long-standing friends, and he wants to contact. The captain got tired, closed his eyes, and thought that this guy with the pirates still had some kind of connection, and decided to find out the price all the same. The guy replied that the price will be approximately 1 million loans, or possibly a little more. One of the men said that Eugene Kurosagi was that person who even a cosmic dog was a difficult task, and he believed that they also risk it at a relatively reasonable price. The captain eventually agreed, but he introduced everything and was convinced that everything was done on time. The man also said that in this case, apparently this case would remain the head of the Department of the Management of Crisis Situations, and this can already be completed. One of the employees asked the captain that they would do the same with a man, and he replied that he should have been a little. And later they gave him to the pirates, and he also controlled that he did not dare no one. The monster at that time came to say so with feeling and knew himself new, and got used to the features that he had. The amorphous finally understood and felt what the peculiarity meant and belonged to new sensations. The monster believed that in any case, after he changed his form, he now needed to reconsider the further plan of his actions. Until now, the key to its existence was invisibility. However, now hunting and existence have become synonyms. He was already practically determined with this, and now he wanted to think over further actions. And for this, he decided to first find out what his further goal was. The system showed that he now had an exceptional state, and his goal is to continue evolution. He also understands that a little predator. He drew attention to the successfully completed process of evolution. That is, this indicator told him that he became an individual. The monster knew that there were 5 stages of evolution in the amorph and the corresponding transformation. At first, it was a cub. The next on the list of transformation was an individual that was once unstable at the moment. Further, the amorphous was transformed from ordinary individuals into teenage, that is, an older monster. The monster's individual was replaced by a young man who already has completely different abilities. After that, the next character appeared in the list of transformations, and it was an adult amorph. The transformation completed this ascended personality that was considered a complete form of amorphous in space survival, and if other words were the end. After the achievements of the data in the game, it was told about the origin of the race where such and so on came from. The amorphous that is possible in search of life at the end of it will also wait for something visible. But the problem is that achieving the final mental form was very difficult. The final form of the race showed only 20 people, including himself. The monster suddenly thought about what it seemed to him very important, and he realized it only now. He realized that becoming an individual, he was able to unlock a new characteristic, but only the type was not defined. He looked at his characteristics and suggested that his type is a strong physique. The system window issued him that it was impossible to unlock the type and asked the question if he wanted to get acquainted with the list of possible types, and the monster decided to take a chance. As expected, the principle that he identified the type of strong body and such results was achieved thanks to increased exoskeleton and acid blood that appeared after the transformation. He saw that this type was like a specialization in the race, but was slightly different from it. This indicator was opened only if certain conditions are met, and it was also directly related to abilities. The system showed him the window that at present he is characterized by 2 types of strong body and independent psyche. The monster realized that he no longer had those skills that were associated with other insects. He did not hit why it became so because he followed everything that was before his eyes. The monster looked puzzled and tried to figure it out, when suddenly he still remembered something. He remembered Kisaragi Eugene and what he received after destroying her. He immediately had a good foreboding, and it suddenly showed that a woman has psychic ability. He understood what was supposed to be at all possible to realize this power, but for this, it was necessary to protect her body. The monster still moved around the ventilation shaft and was heading in the direction he needed. The amorphous of these ventilation holes now, due to its size, seemed so small and narrow, and this gave him great comfort. The monster, passing some distance, suddenly felt a pungent smell. He understood and was glad that he was still able to find what he needed so much. A special room where all bodies were stored next to the room itself, located right under his feet. The guy at this convenient time sat on his chair at the computer and enjoyed the music that sounded in his headphones. He suddenly felt something and decided to personally check what was the reason for this. The guy heard the unpleasant smell and was not surprised why his show was trying to figure it out. He went into the next compartment and saw a huge hole that was corroded due to some kind of liquid. The monster at that time was quietly hiding and tried to be silent so as not to give out his whereabouts. The guy in this liquid was able to recognize the acid solution but did not know how he could get here. He decided that the best in this situation would begin to call the guard to begin with. The monster picked up the very moment and decided to attack the guy so that he could not better call the guard. The amorphous, after dealing with the problem, was suitable for one of the bodies. The monster was able to find the sake of which he actually came here and was very happy about this. He looked at the representative of Noble Prime and was surprised that the woman looked the same as before she was sent to the next world. The monster guessed that most likely for this reason, no one touched the woman. The amorphous suddenly blew over what seemed strange to him, and exactly that when he sent people to the next world. For some reason, he did not see his feelings of guilt. He heard some talked about the fact that a person changed why he got into another Wednesday, and the monster thought about the fact that he really turned into a morph. The monster suggested that he was always so ruthless. The monster believed that thoughts on this subject did not help him, and the morph wanted to eat well for the start of what he actually was about to engage in. In order to survive it, it is necessary to destroy it, and such a life was an amorphous. He thought Kisaragi Eugene really has a psychic perception, and was able to get one thing from the human biological body. The monster knew that an amorphous could use an extrasensory perception without any organs, and therefore for him it was a real trifle. He decided that it should not be perceived in a negative way, and therefore he will have to take measures to get this type. The monster later changed slightly in appearance and he had some crests, and he was able to understand how this organ looked in the amorphous, and it was even funny for him. He did not know for sure, but perhaps this characteristic may be useful. This is what use can be after unification with another genome of a flare of a predator, and after the monster was completed from Kisaragi, the monster decided that he was thinking of looking at the guard, and that had some strange taste. The amorphous saw that between the soldiers changed the guard, and he did not know that there was such a little reinforced equipment on the ship since one of them offered his costume battle. He knew that the doctor should also be replaced and the changer would notice all this. Now there was an era of cosmos, and soon everyone decided that the monster was there somewhere in the ship, and he could not risk it. He knew that so far it was not so quietly to deduce the reflection with the crew members, and therefore he needed one who could pull the time until he became stronger. The amorphous noticed that smoke was half-accated from the hole, and he thought about the fact that preservatives and chemicals were stored in this place to process those who had already gone to the next world. Suddenly, he came up with a great idea how to intimidate the crew members. Officially, the capital was not in the Megacorp, but regardless of this place it was possible to name their center, and it was planet Earth where the apartment and the current Megacorp office were located. 5 companies that have made the greatest contribution to the creation of mech corporations became the owners of the Earth. The Eugen family, upon arrival, went to the region previously known as East Asia and went to this 5. The Yujin family began to conduct a small business in a small country called South Korea, and now the country has become a resident of this system. A man for movement there used small-sized aircraft and a magnetic pillow train. In the sky, the artificial sun luminary for people of the Yujin family and millions of tools subordinate to them. Somewhere on the outskirts there was a beautiful house surrounded by green trees and hills. A middle-aged man cultivated the earth, and judging by his expression on his face, brought him great pleasure. While he worked, he granted the guests, and it was two men in solid costumes. The man suddenly said that he was already waiting for them and ordered these guys to approach him. The one who cultivated the land asked that the same thing happened, and one of the people answered the man that their visit is connected with the mistress. The man heard that it was about Madame Kisaragi, who was his youngest daughter, and was very happy about this. A man in a suit informed me that the lady's beacon was destroyed. The man said that this simply could not be because he asked Kisaragi not to do something burdensome and fragile. The man in the suit reported that the last signal arrived on November 8th, and they checked that this planet was calculated for a space dog. The man came closer to the man in a suit and put his hand on his shoulder, but at the same time did not say a word, but simply decided to destroy this man. He suddenly said that Kisaragi had accumulated 1 billion loans, and this last stage of development of a modern battleship. In addition, she was subjected to genetic modification, and very doubted that some pirates could touch her. The man became curious who dared to harm his beloved Yujin, and he also decided to clarify whether the meteor of which Samuel commands the ship on the shore of Kisaraga, and he answered convincingly. He compared that if the speech went to the Samuel and satellite of Titan, then it was by chance that the people of Edgerton were involved in this, but the man was sure that the captain had nothing to do with this matter, because Edgerton's son was a coward. The man was sure that he simply lacks the spirit of the home sofa of Yujin, and yet he decided to become interested in the opinion of another person. He replied that he suspects that in this case was a mixed company T and C. Eugene's father could not restrain his emotions, and said that he was thinking about the same. This company T and C and Edgerton are fighting to control Jupiter, but in fact they were in a conversation. The man was sure, because Edgerton receives loans from this company. He was thinking that an attempt to intercept the initiative at a meeting of the board of directors. His assistant confirmed his guesses and said that the post of general director of T and C is occupied by Chamberlain. In other words, it was a struggle for the place of the head of the family. Eugene's father was the same opinion, because judging by the actions of that impudent person, he was to be afraid of him. The man said that they have a significant reason, and therefore they will cause the first, and led the story of a blow to all this to all our family. He also said that in the Area 08, a shadow lurked, and it is necessary to contact him to figure it out. The assistant tilted his low head and replied that he understood everything and immediately began to perform the indicated action. Eugene's father also ordered him to deliver everyone who had at least some kind of newly attitude to the Meteor Samuel or ship. He very menacingly said that the one who dared to encroach on his actions would necessarily be destroyed. After some time, I discovered someone who destroyed the monster on the ship, only nobody knew about it. The captain saw that all this was furious because nothing was happening at all. The soldiers reported that there was smoke in the room, and he was strange when they went in. Then everything ordered everything to the fire. The guard said that he immediately wanted to find out what happened, but only the doctors were allowed to enter. The doctor leaned over the body and looked thoughtfully, because he could not understand how a fire could arise in such a room. Please note that this person wore a ring, and apparently he was a member of the team that worked on top. The man decided to clarify with the colleagues whether it was the victims that they discovered, and he was given a positive answer. The head of the medical brigade quietly said that this simply could not be, and he did not want to believe in it. The man asked the captain today called all the leaders of the ship because they had a big problem. After some time, each chapter took its place at the table and was already announced for everyone that they had a big problem, but that the body of one guard and the head of the research group disappeared. The captain became furious because they certainly did not leave themselves, and therefore someone directly did it with them under the nose. He asked the head of the medical brigade whether he was sure of this, to what he answered that he personally double-checked all several times. However, there were not enough, exactly 2 bodies. The head of the medical team said that it was not all, and if we talk about chemicals that were stored in the morgue and could ignite. But fires on such a scale are very rare, and other formulas say that this fire was created artificially. Men could not understand who could do this then, and then one of them suggested that alien creatures were not identified on a desktop computer. The head of the material supply department shouted that it was apparently some kind of joke. This chapter was asked not to be nervous, so because the man simply suggested. The head of medical brigade said that they have a more serious problem in the current situation, is that the body of the head of the research group disappeared. The captain decided to show everyone that they had already decided that they would contact the pirates. He also added that they need to find her body of any hole that it would not reply. The captain shouted all this in a rage due to the current situation in which they all were now. He also recalled that this applies not only to one of him, and if someone is afraid of space from representatives of noble capital, then they need to start cooperation. The captain decided to find out that he had already contacted the pirates in the crisis management department. The man replied that he did not begin to open this matter, and did it immediately after their meeting. The captain believes that the pirates should not explain anything, but simply say that they give them the body, and that's all. He recalled that it was a man's undertaking, and if they are not all indifferent, then another problem will arise. The captain was very hoping that their dominance of security was very clear, and hoped that they would not have new problem. According to this opinion, the head of security is obliged to catch the queen and try more diligently. The captain allowed to interrogate all crew members, but found a warning at all, and said that he had put on him all the powers. The amorph lurked in a ventilation shaft all this time, and listened carefully to what the men were talking about. The monster was very pleased with the fact that his plan still worked, and no one could expose him. He was glad that he managed to hide his identity and intimidate the enemies to arrange a fire. No one would have thought that an alien creature could get a job in a fire morgue. The monster went that toxic substance was created from a mixture of chemicals and a pair of drops of acid blood. Everything went smoothly, and the flame took care of the bodies well. The amorphous heard one of the men said that he did not expect that he could talk about aliens at all, and thought that the captain had already sued all over the world at all in himself. He decided to contact dead cosmic creatures. The monster recognized in this man the head of the Department of Crisis Situations. However, for himself he decided that he would check it a little later because there were great fears that he could be in a conversation with the pirates. The amorphous knew that the pirates were different races, and therefore he could get a lot of genes' essences. However, the assault could reduce the number of genes that the monster could get in this research court. The monster decided for himself that in any case he would make a decision after it became known that these cosmic creatures are good. Suddenly the amorphous saw someone below under him. He learned in this person the head of the material supply department, which denied the existence of the monster. The monster perfectly understands that this situation with the head has nothing to do with it at all, but for some reason said so anyway. A few minutes later he looked around, checking that there was no one next to him. The head of the material supply department attached his hand to unlocking the lock on the door. The monster noticed that the man unlocked the cargo compartment, but since he turned out to be the head of the department, therefore, a visit to the cargo compartment for him was in order. However, the alertness was that the person behaved unnaturally. The amorphous constantly what such thought that man hid so much once answered. A certain container attracted his attention, or rather, the traces of the head of the department broke off here. He noticed that a fingerprint scanner was installed here, and the system entering the identifying cards and its safety were higher than that of others. The monster noted that the walls of this container were so thick that he could not find out what the body is inside, even with the help of extrasensory observation. He is sure that it was hidden, that it was very important. He was originally going to eliminate the head of the medical team. However, he changed his mind, and now his goal is the man who decided at that moment to relax. The guy who sat in the same way at the persistent told the head of the department that in his opinion, there is already enough. The head of the department was noticeably nervous and even sweated slightly, and all due to the fact that a lot of strange things that have been difficult to call a normal life have been discovered recently. He could no longer think that he would trust the coder's merchant in the black market. She then told him that they were diverted in ancient ruins, and he decided that this can be done well on this, so he sacrificed them here. They then agreed on the deal and secretly put the eggs on board, and at that moment, everything was fine. Only one day when he decided to rest, a little one egg in some way hatched. The man began to regret that at that moment the container was not closed tight enough. The head of the department suddenly heard some rustle behind me and suddenly turned around to find out the cause of this sound. He behind him did not notice anyone, and immediately concentrated in his thoughts. Suddenly the rustle repeated again, and when he turned to the tail and paws of a creature and it scared him very much. He is uneven who it is or what it is, but from independence, he began to quickly recover from independence. He tried to run out of this room as soon as possible due to the fact that whoever was there, he portended big troubles. The man in this hurry did not pay attention to this, and therefore stumbled falling to the floor. He saw a telephone in front of him and tried to pull himself up to him to call and report his intentions that he saw and help. The amorphous was already very close and of course was not going to let go of his move, and all the more better any calls. The monster approached the man as quickly as possible, and after he opened his destruction, the man stopped even his breath out of fear. The amorphous was with a good sense of humor, and therefore, looking at the head of the international department, decided to wish himself a pleasant appetite. The monster believed that sending that light to this man was very easy because of a cheeky lifestyle. The amorphous knew that this person was just using all the time uselessly, and considers him even a certain thief's salary since he received this salary for anything. The monster believes that in general, the captain of this ship should be grateful to him, because he invests a large number of people in the staff who constantly pay salaries. The amorphous is very angry because this man was very dirty, but he needed to find a confirming card. He sorted out all his things in search of only one thing, and suddenly this card fell on the table. The monster was looking at his find, that he was able to find this card, and this, despite the fact that he collected everything he needed. Amorphia is still thinking that the head of the material supply department is not very tasty. The monster went to the closed door that he needed to open just with the help of this map. This card came in handy, and he was able to get inside, and with great impatience wanted to see everything there. The head of the section at this place tried to close everything thoroughly, and the monster was curious to find out what exactly. The amorph looked around and saw around the cryocamers and realized that this man turned out to be a counterbanking player. The monster suddenly looked at the open container and saw amorphous eggs in it. He drew attention to the fact that in this container, one egg turned out to be empty. The amorphous suggested that most likely he was hatched from this egg. The monster guessed that this former head of the department tried to secretly take him out. He was confused only by the factor that the starting location of the amorphous in the game was not on this ship but on mysterious ruins. The monster did not know what exactly happened, but the owner of his body left this container immediately after hatching, and the trial around the world he went to the next day after that due to the manifestation of food. The amorphous is the same that after all this he already entered into his body, and this explained that factor why those cockroaches seemed so tasty to him. He guessed that most likely his body moved instinctively trying to survive. The monster thought about all this, even slightly nervous, and eventually decided to honor the memory of his leader. After all this, he decided that you can already forget about all this and continue to do what was fitting amorphous. He adheres to those rules that the amorphous that hatches the first to devour other eggs. He was a little sorry that there were no messages about the activation of the predator effect. The monster that, in principle, it was not so important anymore, and he enjoyed that it seemed just tasty to him. He was still glad, and the fact that in this place could be much more than to enjoy, and the monster was not going to refuse it. Amorph came from a system window in which there was a lot of interesting information. He saw that in his features it was now added, besides that there was still the ability to imitate sounds, and he had only 2 points left to get the type of strong body. He was slightly disappointed after he met Kizareggs on the hem, since instead of psychic abilities, he received some useless psychic organ. He is grateful for the fact that although the head of the material supply department was able to present him such a generous gift, these were strong characteristics that could only be obtained in the middle of the game. These characteristics work with the monster more efficiently. Thanks to them, the team members can act more actively. The amorphous guessed that he had a meeting with a space dog soon. By accident, he did not know that they were dangerous, and therefore the monster had to become stronger before meeting with. The monster asked to wait for his head, and that even if they scream them anyway, no one would hear in endless space. No one can hear the critics of this research vessel, since they will be buried in this abyss. Your thorough business on the runway of the Megacorp research vessel. The man went to one of the aircraft and invited his comrade Scott to have dinner, and he told him completely as he had almost finished. Leaving the aircraft to the question of whether he still had to do, Scott answered that he was still quite enough, and he will have to get out with this overtime. The comrade sympathized with Scott as his comrades pay for a lot of work. After some time, the men had dinner in the dining room, and one of them said that the order of maintenance could not understand. This is not equal to the fact that even if it is a reflection of the same need to reconfigure aircraft, the Fincher, namely, the name of Comrade Scott, is not like that really wants something about work during eating. Scott decided to tell that he heard that they were preparing for a hunt for Metal Gremlin. Fincher replied that if they meet Metal Gremlin, then from them after that, and there will be no wet place. The man told Fincher that this is not the most important thing, that Scott heard that this gremlin is already on their computer. Scott added that Fincher is confident in this strange smell in the air, and it is believed that this is the smell of Metal Gremlin. He also said that in addition to this, his acquaintance from the hostel said that people began to disappear from the last weeks. Fincher answered all this that he considers it all some kind of inventions and nothing more. Suddenly, another man decided that he also heard such things, and besides, the head of the material supply department was somewhere. In this regard, he was temporarily appointed manager of the cargo compartment. Fincher said that even if we assume that people began to disappear, he does not call their initial position without chairs at the same time. The guys replied that in the first authorities it was hidden that all the norms avoid waves, and secondly that the metal gremlin was to blame for all this, but only the Fincher did not share their opinions. Fincher did not understand what was all these disappearance of these losses to the service of fighters, but no one could answer this question. The guys suggested that perhaps the authorities work in this way with discipline, and Fincher has already begun to be annoyed from all these conversations. Fincher already, when he left, told these guys in the end that they may be right. After some time, he went to the fighter where his colleagues continued the repair work of the man. Fincher informed Scott that he wanted to eat something, and if he wanted something, Scott asked his colleague to bring him something synthetic, and it would be better for him. While Fincher went to fulfill the order of his comrade, Scott thought about whether he could finish today, when suddenly the man heard his name. In Scott Droy, he heard someone at his request approaches him in a minute, and in this voice he recognized Cameron. Scott replied that he was now slightly busy, but his voice was persistent, and continued to ask the man approached her for a while. Scott decided to balance the request, but warned that if it was a trifle, then Cameron was not to do after that. When the man got out of the fighter, he noticed that there was no one outside, and it seemed strange to him. Scott heard the same voice that called him, only now he left the maintenance room. It was not clear to a man what this person did, and even more so without visible lighting. Cameron's voice answered the man that he was looking for something, and therefore he needed little help. Scott walked and thought that people sometimes annoy him. Scott, having gone a few meters, suddenly felt what a strange smell was, something like a rotten fish, but all of it was some other. The man had already begun to be very annoyed because he still did not see the sake of whom he himself came here. Scott was almost on the distant air and therefore could not take a closer look at the bolts on the floor and did not step on it. All this led to the fact that the man slipped and hit his head heavily on the floor. The man suddenly thought that somehow everything was suspicious in this room, because even if you turn on the flashlight, it was difficult to see something in such darkness. Scott suddenly remembered that the head of the material supply department was somewhere, and in connection with this was appointed temporary head, and also remembered the words of the comrades that people began to disappear from the last week. The man called the one whom he came here and came, but Cameron did not answer anything radically, and the monster was already hiding behind him. The amorphous was squeezed with his paws. Scott, and it was immediately clear that nothing good guy was waiting. The monster looked carefully in his opinion and looked very menacingly. The amorph did not stand on ceremony for a long time, and almost immediately sent the guy to the next world, and he did not expect the ability to imitate it would be so useful. Fincher at that time returned and called his comrade Scott to say that he sacrificed what he asked. A man is no more even than his comrade gone, and began to get a little nervous because Scott was not one of those people who threw halfway on halfway. Fincher suddenly heard the voice of his friend who informed him that he was in the maintenance room. The man asked the same thing and answered him so much to find something. Fincher still could not understand what in this room could be done without light, and the voices of Scott asked him to take a step to carry out the transfer. The man began to be angry and suddenly saw that the lantern was lying on the floor and most likely his comrade. Fincher began to be very nervous and worried, and in general he did not like this whole situation. The man did not immediately, but still felt that he began to drip from above. Fincher saw all the blood and the same thing happen, and most importantly, he did not know where his comrade Scott was. A moment later, the monster let me know and appeared in front of a man in all its glory, and it looked very creepy. He did not stand on ceremony and sent Fincher after Scott, and still continued to rejoice at his abilities to imitate his voices. He knew that among the leaders of material supply, he tried to smuggle the larvae of the red worm. These were giant rainworms living on planets and deserts. Worms usually imitate sounds made by other living beings, and people convinced that these creatures evolved in order to more effectively hunt other creatures in severe reality. The monster was considered remarkable that he managed to take possession of the essence of the red worm gene. However, the acquired ability is inferior to the outcome. He found out that he could simulate a voice only with less income, but it was an additional skill for him. The amorphous decided that tomorrow he would definitely enjoy Who from the catering. The monster recalled the name of that guy, and it seemed to him that this name was Pierre. The amorphous was almost sure that that person was not very close to the Fincher, but it was not so important for him because he would get what he desired anyway. The amorphous cleared his way, and suddenly in the head of his familiar bubble of amoeba, and hoped that everything was fine with you. The monster believed that on his part it is rather strange to turn to such a concept as a simple bubble, and he decided that from that moment he would be called 6. The amorphous decided that he probably was still worth a look at him before he heads into the nest. Suddenly the monster heard the greeting of that very number 26, and could not think that this is how its extrasense organ works. He did not think that you can communicate with creatures that are blocked with the help of waves. Amorph that he should say hello to his so-called friend, and he talked about it greetings. The monster heard that the amoeba bubble tells him that today is very hungry today. The amorphous signal also draws attention to the fact that the vocabulary of this guy has grown significantly from their last meeting, and apparently Psionia has the effect of which he does not know anything. The monster turned to the number 26 and apologized to say that it would be very difficult to get food today. Amoeba's bubble asked him what the restriction was, and the amorphous replied that he simply could not get food. The monster perfectly understood that he disappointed his friend, however, used this passage with some kind of fertile. He knew that after the poisoning of the head of the research, the head of the security department of the security laboratory to the maximum, and now even the ventilation mine over the laboratory was a great threat. For this reason, the monster could not bring Amo to the Batonchik for several days, because everything he could talk to him. The amorphous handed it to his comrade that he has, and Amoeba, in response, said that he would wait for their next meeting. The monster knew that you could help my friend only after the revolution, but the problem was that it was quite difficult to evolve. To do this, it was necessary to destroy 10 representatives of 2 reasonable races and get the essence of genes from them, because only this can be evolved. He knew that only people protect on this ship, and therefore evolution is impossible. There were still pirates, but nothing is known about them yet. The monster used his skills and heard something, but so far he could not completely make out these words. This was the head of the department of the crisis situation, and he tried to understand whom he was talking to. The head of the department was in the headphones and told his interlocutor that everything goes according to plan. The man suddenly heard all the information as he was told that the order from the family. The head of the Department of Management of Crisis Situations decided that in any case, everything is fitting perfectly as possible. Since Mrs. Kisaragi has already eliminated, the ship will arrive on 08 according to the plan. The monster was very surprised that it turned out that all the orders of Captain Meteora were recorded. The man put his hand to open access to the next compartment and said that everyone should go in accordance with the will of the family, and to be more precisely, then Chan Eugene. The monster carefully followed the man and listened to everything that he was talking about. The amorphous realized that this head of the department was vile because he betrayed his captain. The monster guessed that judging by the conversation with the person that he thought and decided to observe him to understand whether his actions would benefit him or to the harm. The captain was furious from the fact that the head of the security department did not understand how to choose his work correctly, and he donated an apology in response. One man said that they have already heard these apologies very many times, but his evil is that he still does nothing and is not authoritarian. The man observing security reported that they had already increased the number of surveillance cameras and protection, but this was not enough for the captain. The captain asked in the head of the navigation department how many people were gone. He replied that 8 people, including the former head of the material supply department. The man was angry because the head of the research group was sent to the next world, and 7 more people went missing. He did not understand why they still could not find a definition, and suggested that perhaps they agreed with him. The amorphous heard all this and, mocking them quietly, said that all this time she stood very close. The captain managed to master these data, and he suddenly heard him how the man says that the head of the security service department is not deceiving. A person faced with a crisis situation said that he personally checked everything and added that the head of the security service department did everything he could. The captain from these words did not get better, and on the contrary, it was even more angry because the kingdom was not caught and he still fades and protect him here. The head of the Department of Crisis Situations in which, by human measures, not a single person could close such situations. He also said that the metallic gremlins were just rumors and suggested that someone did not know about whom they did not know about them. The monster noticed that the atmosphere became a little strange. One of the men decided that the head of the crisis management department was that artificial intelligence in the court previously stood on the established battleship. The same person that, if there were some kind of living creature on board, then he would have been discovered for a long time. The head of the emergency services replied that he served in the army and knows very well how artificial intelligence works. He also said that everyone knew about the container who was transported by the head of the material supply department, and that all cryocameras were empty. The chapter in crisis situations wanted to know how to go with me who was in these cryocameras. The monster observed everything that was happening and was upset since it happened to what he was most afraid of. The captain suggested that if in fact a space monster is running around his ship, then he does not always understand where it goes once. No one has ever seen him. The man replied that there was a place that they had not yet examined, and essentially chose the place itself. The head of the crisis management department said that they have not examined the ventilation. He told everyone that ventilation shafts are located around the ship and added that in height, these ventilation shafts were about 1 meter, and this was quite enough for convenient placement. Men in the world too little destroy anyone but a man replied that metal gremlin with a height of 8 dozen inches. However, he can destroy a whole battleship. The monster recalled that this man's name was Arnold. Monster was still upset because he wanted to take a chance earlier, and there was an opportunity for this man so far. Men in the world believe that if this Arnold claims that they have big troubles since this creature destroyed the head of the research group. The head in crisis situations thought that if they managed to establish that this monster covered Kiaraga Eugene, then they will be able to do it, and with the pirates they will have to fight if they can't find the loss. The captain thought, as he heard that in order to win the victory, it was necessary to begin to control the situation from the inside. In order to protect people, they need to deal with the monster. The head of the captain's ship wanted to know how many soldiers were appointed for this, and they answered that a man was ready to take 6 people from 8 detachments. The captain gave his decision about the operation, and was very hoping that the check of ventilation mines would bear fruit. The monster understood that it was time for him to look for another disclosure about his existence, and therefore did not know for a rather long time. He knew that sooner or later he had to face this authority. The amorphous guessed that Arnold put a ventilation device and this ventilation was sealed. The monster knew that if he would have nowhere to go on the kinetic nest, because in the corridors the surveillance cameras were stuffed, and the ventilation shafts were unsuitable for use. For the amorphous, it's time to make your choice. The monster still does not know that it is better for him to choose a flight or all the same. The impact of resistance will be better. He recalled that the head of the department in crisis situations then said that by human standards, not a single person learned to reveal such thing. The monster remembered well how that man said that the ventilation mines were located all over the ship, and their height was sufficient for comfortable movement. The man wanted them to simply take him to noble capital, and if the installation is released, it was this monster who half the Kisaragi Eugene would be sure to believe me. An amorphous who thinks that people most likely perceive him as a wild animal with the most ordinary planet. He reasoned over the topic that a hostile cosmic being can destroy his opponent, even if it hurts his limbs and leaves only one head. The amorphous about all this decided that he would definitely train. He decided that it was apparently reckless and stupid was the idea of hunting amorphous with a small number of soldiers. The monster in the ventilation shaft wanted to use all possible means to show how it looks in space. The amorphous used to use his abilities, and established a connection with the whole ship, and saw that the personal ship began to connect with the ship. The staff tested the staff from the searches of the compartments, and ending with the tracking of the location and the movement of rivals. The monster suggested that if the ship floats in space, a living creature, then it is no different from the parasite in the brain. The amorphous knew what was happening on the ship in principle, like its keeper. The captain and heads of the units gathered on the bridge, and Arnold was also there, and judged all that this man commanded us. The monster saw that the armed soldiers of this ship also set in motion, and as he expected, their group divided. He has already decided on other points of the plan, and with the entire coronavirus monster decided that he would decide along the way, depending on the movement and its weapons. The monster was about to go to meet his guests whom he did not call. He was completely ready for their arrival. The heads of the department monitored everything through surveillance cameras, and the Team A, already one, was in position, and began to complete the operation. People in the operational room established a connection with the team in 1, and this team reported what is already in position, and is ready to begin to complete the operation. The command handed over that there was a bad connection with the team in 1, and saw that everyone was carefully studied. They were told that if they suddenly see in the distance, then the suspicious, then they will immediately report. The head of the department in crisis situations thought that Ms. Kisaragi would most likely destroy the monster, and the personal man should initially be eliminated by her. He reflected on the fact that his plan remains in principle without changes. However, the quantity must be reduced finally. Of course, it was possible since it was impossible to allow this to increase before the increase in Mr. Yugen. The man was sure that this monster would go to the next day before it ends today. The team, and 1 was said that a fork is ahead of them, and they should go to the right. The signal man said that with a couple and 1 connection, it was not very good, and that was ordered to conduct a check and move on. The team replied that everyone understood and contacted them after all the work was completed. Arnold said that their route was complicated and drove very carefully. The man looked at the video surveillance camera and thought about something intensely. He noticed that the team has a team in 3 shows 1 and also, and this must be checked. The man's order was immediately executed, and the operator immediately contacted the team 3 times so that they checked their camera. A few minutes later, they received an answer that with them everything is in perfect order, only the image was still unchanged. The operator ordered the teams in 2, said in 3 that were behind them, and already continued the movement together. Suddenly, all the men who carefully watched the cameras of the observation began to be markedly nervous. Arnold decided to pay attention to the team in 2 that happened, and heard the answer that it was already here. After an instant connection with a couple of 2 were lost, and they hoped that the team in 3 could explain this. They heard the answer that it pulled out the entire team in 2, and since the connection was lost on the screen, that all expected that at least some details were found out. The command received the answer that due to sudden use, it is impossible to check the situation unfortunately. The command turned to their connections hoping that at least he could explain the current situation, but in response they never heard anything intelligible. They then turned to the head of the management department of crisis situations, so that at least he answered reasonably. The man froze due to the fact that he did not expect that the monster so fast that everything could manage. He realized that the soldiers and reinforced equipment could not withstand because they were attacked, and realized that even for experienced fighters they withstood such a heavy blow. The man all this time thought that they were dealing with a wild belly, but now he realized that he was also very mistaken, and this creature was more agile than he thought. Arnold ordered the connection to immediately convey that all teams opened fire in the event of the slightest movement. The man gave the command once from 1-3, and after that, they should find the team in 2 and immediately report to them about the situation. The team 3 times heard that they should temporarily stop finding a team in 2 and to begin to answer their forces with the team in 1. Arnold stood and carefully watched all the cameras, and that if everything will continue, then all the teams will be in the near future. The man heard the team as one reported in 1 that they heard something ahead, and everyone froze in anticipation. The team reports that they did not know that it was precisely for the sound, but they are sure that the obvious setting of goals did not change due to the fork. A few minutes later, it was said that the team in 1, adjusting the information, and then the sound of a team of 3 was heard. The whole operating room was exhausted, and led to report a room in 1 as they were distributed in 3. After a few long minutes of waiting, the whole operational room heard that the whole team in 3 dragged the signal. The head of the department put on the headphones for communication with the couple, and decided to personally find out the current situation. He answered one of the soldiers and said that everything happened so quickly that he could not really see anything. Arnold got angry much because he did not differ how they did not use anything if the monster was next to them. The man did not believe that everything is possible only if this creature was always nearby, but they didn't notice anything. Arnold thought about the topic that the creature never hit the cameras in 1 and 3, and he considered it impossible that the monster deliberately avoid all the video surveillance cameras. The man suddenly thought and decided to check his guesses, and again put on the headphones for communication ordered the group. "What is your full name?" Arnold did not hear anything in response and then once again repeated his order, so that the team immediately bore himself. The man in response heard the sarcastic answer that at the same time, but apparently he was all the same exposed. At the same moment, the connection with all the videos was lost, and the man realized that it was the work of the monster itself. Arnold did not understand what was happening at all and hoped that the team in 1 would give him an answer, but in response, there was silence. The monster at that moment ended with the team B and went on. He received a hint from his comrade Amoeba, and thanks to him, he disabled means of communication with the help of waves. The 3 team that was walking behind was interfering, and everything was because of these waves. The Amorphous eliminated the soldier who was engaged in the repair of equipment with the help of a new combined skill of poisonous glands. After that, the monster was masterfully and quickly dealt with everyone else, and at the same time, also ate from the heart. Then he had a Team A. The Amorphous, using his abilities, decided to find out where they, and after they found them, saw that the guys were all in full combat readiness. For the monster, it was not surprising because he was so lucky that the team did not know anything about him. The monster understood that now his opponent knew that he could imitate the human voice. The Amorph tried to understand how he could wrap the current situation in his direction. He saw that the fork was ahead of where, and the Team A would appear in the near future. The monster heard that people said that knowledge is power, and now he was just about to check whether it was really so. He also knew that incomplete knowledge could be poison. The soldiers saw that there was a fork in front of them, and they decided to hold on to the right side. The head of the department decided to repeat to them once again that the creature could imitate the human voice, and if they suddenly hear their voice, then ordered to immediately open fire to defeat. One of the soldiers suddenly heard someone in front calling for help, and he ordered his team to open fire because he believed that it was a monster. The soldiers completed this team immediately, and all almost simultaneously opened fire. The monster, as soon as he saw this attack, immediately tried to hide so that they could not hurt him. A few minutes later, the team was given to cease in order to evaluate the situation. The operational room at that moment ordered the soldiers to establish the status of the enemy at the next opportunity. The rest of the soldiers was given a team to remain in their positions and cover the team and won. The monster was already very close, but no one could find him. One of the soldiers from the team, a 3, suddenly heard a noise, but it was already too late, and all that he managed to convey to the command that the creature from the back. The rest was given to the team to open fire, but they did not do this because the monster took the soldier hostage, and if they open fire about, it can hurt him. The command was displeased, but still ordered to open fire to defeat, even despite the fact that under the blow was one of their soldiers. The monster did not expect such a turn of events, and therefore hurried to hide so as not to fall under the fire. The soldiers hastened to report to their command that the fighter was wounded. The command ordered to immediately continue the persecution, as they hoped that the monster would be able to catch. The fighter was in serious condition, and the comrades tried to bring him to his senses. The soldiers realized that they had a shock and decided to inject. After the Team A1 injected, they reported to the command that they continue the mission. The operational room handed over to the soldiers that they need to catch this monster in any case and destroy. The soldiers suddenly discovered a strange liquid on the floor and concluded that they still managed to injure the monster. They looked closely and recognized acidic blood in this liquid, and this was a great surprise for them because they could not even imagine what kind of creature was this. The team went a little forward and saw a certain passage in front, which was very narrow, and they tried to understand how to be further, but still decided to move on. Team A1 asked the command permission to use a special regime for a more efficient suppression of the enemy. The head of the department approved their request. The soldier used this function, and a few minutes later, his pupil began to look different. The guys were going to destroy this monster at all costs, and each of them was already ready for anything for this purpose. They walked a few meters forward and found a rather large hole in the floor. The soldiers reported to the command that in the ventilation shaft they noticed a large hole, but there are no more traces. They suggested that most likely the creature went down to the corridor. The operational room asked to name their exact location so that they could search the corridor. The amorph decided to outwit the soldier and quietly lurked behind their backs. Team A1 did not have time to name the exact place because it was suddenly attacked by a monster. The opponent did not give the soldiers the opportunity to destroy himself and was going to do all this himself, but only with them. One soldier was seriously destroyed, and the second tried to do at least something and therefore desperately rushed to the attack. The soldier was very angry and aggressively tuned in this creature, because of him many of his comrades went to the next world. The amorphous began to retreat, but the soldier decided to use his weapon and opened fire on this monster, but could not get to. The monster moved very quickly around the ventilation shaft, and it was almost impossible to catch up with. The amorphous realized that these soldiers were much stronger than he expected, but in the game he could cope with them even despite the special mode. He decided that it was time to change his strategy. The monster also realized that now not a single trick will work properly on the team, and won. Suddenly he came up with something and was going to realize his plan. The soldier at that time was sitting on the floor and breathing heavily because he received a serious injury. The monster approached this soldier, and the guy himself could not do anything, and only fear was red in his eyes. The amorph was not going to deviate from his goal, and even more so, he did not plan to show a pity for anyone. In a matter of moments, he simply destroyed this soldier by depriving him of the slightest hope of salvation. Amethyr believed that now this would be enough for this, and thus the command would decide that 3 were attacked on the other side. The monster shot a video camera of this fighter and immediately destroyed it, thereby depriving the command of any information. The operational room immediately handed over to all other teams that the monster attacked, and 3. The soldier was in a hurry to the man from the team and 3, and very much hoped that he would be fine. He tried to bring to the sense of his comrade, but he, due to the injury, was in serious condition and was unconscious. The soldier understood that the matter was very bad, and therefore wanted him to urgently take the medicine and hoped that it would help. Suddenly, the soldier suddenly attacked, and it was so unexpectedly that he was confused and could not resist. That wounded soldier was subject to the monster and, unfortunately, has long been destroyed by that being. The amorphous, after sending the soldier to the next world, took up his full height and felt omnipotent and very strong. The monster approached the second, and looking directly into his eyes, wished himself a pleasant appetite. The amorph understood that they would not hear anything through the communicator, but he knew for sure that he was afraid of all now. The whole operational room saw through the video observation the whole horror that took place with the guys. Arnold also watched everything that was happening, and began to think that this creature would send them all into the next world. The monster made sure that the spider nets were stretched not only in the ventilation shaft, and therefore the people in the operational room were the following in line. The amorphous wanted to know where the enemy will come from this time. He knew that 6 were already destroyed and 90 soldiers and officers remain. The monster also understood the fact that having received his message, they immediately mobilize all their strength. The monster was known that there was no special equipment on this ship, however, the problem could arise with weapons. He was afraid that if they are armed with plasma weapons, then he would definitely have a bad one. The plasma weapon was with high firepower and it was used by the fleet during hostilities. Most often, these weapons are used to destroy enemy ships or tanks. These guns were so large and heavy that it was impossible to use one, but also existed lighter and more expensive weapons. It was also known that each Megacorp unit was equipped with one plasma launcher. The Amorphous doubted that one of these people could have something similar, and therefore, in this regard, he was calm. The monster drew attention to the fact that the soldiers moved to the agricultural compartment, probably thinking that he would sit in one place. The Amorphous believed that it was a very good chance for him, and it was foolish to miss him. The monster decided that while everyone was busy with his search, he should visit the leadership. He thought that if you slightly survived the leading posts, then there would be simply no one to manage the ship. The Amorphous believed that in addition to this, he should still eliminate that Arnold, since he carried a real threat to his existence. He heard how the head of the department in crisis situations asked where this monster came from. Arnold replied that the head of the materials supply department transported unknown creatures on the ship, and most likely this monster was one of them. It was also said that they even used enhanced equipment. However, this did not help. The monster knew that the enhanced equipment was a lifebuoy in space that cost a lot of money, and trying to reduce expenses, they threatened their own life. The command was said that if they had normal equipment, then this would not have happened. Arnold said that their opponent is very dangerous and smart, and moreover, they now know that this creature can imitate human speech. The man was outraged and replied that they had to find out about this before. The head of the Department of Management in crisis situations believed that data collection was of paramount importance, and all actions are based on well-known information. Arnold reported that he had already sent a soldier, but the man still had one request. The head of the department requested permission to use the plasma launch installation. He was answered that he was just crazy because this weapon was intended to fight the pirates. They also reminded the man who was generally on the ship, and this idea is simply absurd. They believed that even considering that this ship was a former battleship, to use something similar was unacceptable. Arnold said if he wants to go to the next world, then he can just go into space, but alone. The monster, listening to this, realized that they apparently really had a weapon. He saw that his rivals were confused, and it was the perfect moment he could catch his prey. The Amorphous looked imperceptibly into the room and saw that Arnold stood at the same time too far. He drew attention to him. The closest to him was one man, and decided that this man would become his original goal. This man was a senior researcher Wei, and it was this man that he tormented his comrade Amo every day. Therefore, the monster was convinced that it was worth focusing on it. The Amorphous still planned to ever destroy this person, and apparently came the right time. The monster no longer began to hesitate, and using the surprise factor decided to rush into the attack. The same researcher, when he noticed that he was approaching him very much, and froze in place. All the people who were at that moment in the room were horrified by the monster with such dexterity sent their researcher to the next world. The signalman tried to transfer the information to the soldiers, but did not manage to do this since he was destroyed by the monster. They wanted to stop the Amorphous at least, and therefore began to use everything that they had at hand, and the input went weapon. The monster saw the head of the department, and was very surprised as he thought that he had been running away for a long time. Looking around the man, the creature was surprised even more, due to the fact that there was not even an enhanced equipment on that. The Amorphous looked at the man's weapon in his hands, and did not worry since such a gun was not at all terrible. The monster thought that since Arnold so much wants to go to the other world, he could organize it. It turned out to be not so simple and easy as the monster planned, and it was also very much puzzled. He saw that a man had a plasma pistol. It was an expensive and light weapon with high damaging power, and if Arnold can get into the target, it would easily destroy the monster. The Amorphous guessed that apparently this man had something to do with the Eugene family. Arnold realized that the monster was able to notice his guns, and guessed about his power and accuracy. The rest of the command staff was very surprised when they saw what weapon their comrade owned, because each of them knew his price. They did not understand where the head of the Department of Management in crisis situations had such an expensive weapon, and were very interested in this. Arnold did not know what kind of creature this was before him, but he had one assumption. The man was sure that this monster had many abilities in front of him, and even something looked like his owner of the Echo of Eugene. Arnold decided that he should no longer hesitate, and therefore applied his plasma pistol as intended, and the monster at that moment tried to evade in every possible way. The man knew for sure that before the arrival of his owner, he should reduce the number of variables. The monster unfortunately realized that his affairs are not very, and in general, he was experiencing a big crisis since he found himself on this ship. He knew that usually players were waiting for a great danger, but here he was always an Amorphous. The monster still thought that it was not at all important who was the master of the head of the department, because he greeted him, and not Arnold. The bear, lion, and the wolf were predators who usually face people according to the media and are already making real evil. Only the truth was different, because in fact predators are cowards that avoid serious battles. However, cowardice and caution could be features of the character of a real hunter, and the guy very well learned this lesson playing the amorphous. Indeed, regardless of how strong the abilities were, or who could have the most important thing to have the most important thing, is to never forget about caution. The monster believed that despite all this, he all turned out pretty well. The amorphous applied his abilities and was able to see that the man's heartbeat was stable, and this meant that the nervousness of this man was only a trick for him. The monster guessed that most likely Arnold was aware that he possessed some sensors, and also smelled of a hunter from this man, and he looked like an experienced predator. The rest of the men watched all these a little on the sidelines, and now tried to convey to the head of the department that he is in the operational room, and he should be more careful not to damage the equipment. Arnold heard his comrades and replied that he would try to destroy the monster more carefully. The man noticed how the creature moves and immediately opened fire, hoping that he could at least this time be able to get. The amorphous sat nearby, lurking behind the wall, and realized that it was a certain trick for him. The man announced to the whole ship that he was the head of the Department of Management in crisis situations, and reports that the monster attacked the operational room. He ordered all the troops to immediately gather on the bridge. The monster, hearing all this, realized that it was all a waste of time because Arnold just pretended to be trying to destroy it, but in fact he just wanted to keep it in place. The Amorph did not believe at all that Arnold thus defending the captain and another leader, but he was not going to let the soldiers destroy himself. The monster believed that someone, but there would be no way to deceive him, and was going to end all this until the arrival of the troops. The Amorphous saw a fire extinguisher next to him, and this was just that, in this case, he could help him. The monster unscrewed the fire extinguisher and threw it into the room, and all the people immediately became difficult to breathe. The Amorph took advantage of the moment, and so far it was very bad visibility. He left his shelter. All the people who were to the operational room were disoriented because the appearance was almost zero. Arnold turned to his people and called them unintentional since no one remembered that everyone had a weapon with himself. The man was very angry due to the fact that he missed the monster and now did not know what to expect. He suddenly realized and ordered to immediately withdraw the ship's captain from this room. The monster also heard this and thought that this man is quite insightful. However, this judgment of Arnold was erroneous, and while he was looking for Captain Monster at that moment, deftly dealt with others. Arnold shouted that the guys would not let themselves be deceived and said that this monster was simply trying to use chaos. The man shouted that the monster had just destroyed one member of the leadership and reminded that the creature could imitate the human voice. The monster shouted different phrases and people were at a loss since they did not know who exactly this voice belonged. People held their weapons tightly in their hands, but each of them was scared because he did not know what to expect. One of the people, due to fear, opened fire, but where he was aiming was unknown, and it was precisely these chaotic movements that he sought in Amorphous. The monster took advantage of the situation and decided to attack the head of the department in crisis situations, and this time he succeeded, and he was able to send the man to the next world. The Amorphous decided not to stop on it and aimed at another crew member. The monster found him by surprise, and the guy had no chance to avoid this attack. After all, he climbed back into the ventilation shaft and thought that of course he would like to eat without all this haste, but apparently not now for sure. The monster was sure that the time came just when he needed to make his legs as soon as possible. The captain was, to put it mildly, raged due to this situation and now did not understand how to be. The man decided to take his anger at only the arriving soldiers because in his opinion they lingered, but they could arrive much faster. The captain understood that they would not help anything, and therefore ordered them to go here immediately. After some time, the temporarily acting head of the medical team reported to the captain that they finished with identification. The captain wanted to hear who was able to survive, and in response they said that only the temporarily acting head of the research department was able to actually. All the rest, to the regret, went to the other world. The man was very surprised when he found out that his senior researcher Wei is alive. He was answered that it is, and the man was now in the infirmary. For happiness, the senior employee found the immunity to the toxin that the monster allocated. However, all his senses received severe damage. The head of the medical brigade also said that even if a scientific employee manages to survive, then, unfortunately, he can forever eat only through a tube. The man decided to offer the captain all the same. Space Dog will give up because in his opinion it was the best option for them. The captain called him an egoist, but the man categorically disagreed with his opinion. The commander-in-chief of this vessel ordered a man to stop saying this misunderstanding and advised him to do a job better. The captain was very upset because they had already lost a large number of people, and all because of one creature that appeared from nowhere. He suddenly thought and realized that almost all the heads of different departments were sent to the next world. The captain understood that if they would have to fight with pirates with such a composition, then they will definitely be destroyed. The man said in hearing that perhaps he should quit everyone and escape, and one of the soldiers accidentally heard these thoughts and was shocked. The soldiers reported to the captain that they discovered a pistol that was different from their full time, and said that this weapon was something like that which was the head of the department. The man ordered to immediately carry everything that they could find to him, because any insignificant detail could be useful. The soldiers could not help but obey the order, and therefore immediately handed over the found weapon to the captain. The captain carefully examined him and was delighted as there was more than 60% of that. The man saw that the gun was slightly damaged, but he knew that he could still be used for self-defense. The man understood that on this ship he could not trust anyone anymore, and therefore he needed to take care of himself. The captain thought that the creature was still somewhere on the ship, and therefore he needed to be very attentive, and he did not forget that they would have a meeting with the pirates in 2 days and did not know what to do. The monster at that moment was in his so-called nest and reflected that he managed to eliminate most of the leadership. He believed that even if artificial intelligence reports the problem, it would still take time to understand the situation. The monster was still true that the captain was not the same character on whom it is worth spending his time. The amorphous believed that the most suitable time came to expand his nest. The monster at the moment could afford 3 nests, and since one could start creating 2 more. For him, in the first place, was the dining room, because food is the most important for its existence, and to block the supply, you could infect food. Then there was an arms due to the fact that a plasma installation was stored in that place, and since this weapon was able to destroy it, therefore it should be acted as quickly as possible. The monster believed that the next in line was the laboratory due to the fact that there were many genetic samples and psionium in it. However, the probability that he will be able to get a new ability was less than 10%. The amorph understood that with the psionium he could use all his strength to the maximum, and could prepare for a meeting with pirates and other stronger enemy. The monster therefore decided that at first he would build nests in the dining room and laboratories, and after that he would steal a plasma weapon. The amorphous did not initially plan to use this weapon, but Arnold's words still did not come out of his head. He did not know what the owner of that man was doing. However, he could be somehow connected with the pirates. The monster believed that there was nothing worse than the opponent about which it was not known anything, and respectively, he understood that he had to find out as much information as possible. His thoughts unexpectedly interrupted, and it was his acquaintance who, using his abilities, greeted him. Amorph thought that apparently his comrade number 26 is in perfect order. He was surprised that today apparently did not set any experiment. The monster also, using his abilities, decided to find out from the amoeba how he feels, and he answered him that he was not hurt today. The amorphous decided that no one began to risk and conduct experiments in such a situation, and everyone simply sits in their cabin. The monster from all this concluded that he can afford to act more bolder. The amorphous went ahead a little forward, saw how some sensors reacted, and lit up with bright red light. The monster waited a little more than 30 minutes, but no one came to him, and it all led to certain conclusions. He now knew for sure that he could not be careful anymore, and therefore calmly crawled out of the ventilation shaft. The monster went down to the laboratory and immediately greeted his comrade Amoeba, saying that they had not seen each other for a long time. The amorphous carefully examined the amoeba, and did not see anything suspiciously concluded that he looks healthy. However, the monster understood that if number 26 continued to sit in this bank, then he would just go to the next world due to hunger. Therefore, he thought about what perhaps he should take an amoeba with him. The monster knew that the amoebas were not picky for food, and were also not susceptible to poison. Therefore, the amorphous believed that it could be left in the nest, or take it with you. The amorphous turned to the number 26 to find out if he wanted to get out. Amoeba did not understand what this creature has in mind. The monster decided to explain that he was inviting him to get out of this laboratory, and Amoeba immediately agreed. The amorphous moved back a little, and warning the amoeba so that he was careful to immediately begin to release it. The monster, without much work, broke the vessel in which the number 26 was located and thereby freed his comrade. Amoeba was simply crowded with emotions due to his liberation, and therefore constantly thanked his savior. The monster asked the amoeba to wait a bit, and at that time he went to create a nest. The amorphous decided not to hesitate, and therefore immediately began work to create a nest. Not so much time has passed as Amorph has already coped with its task and the nest was ready. The monster knew that now none of the employees of this vessel simply could use this laboratory. The amorphous realized that because of all this, he used a lot of his strength, and therefore decided to eat a little that it was at hand. Now, it was not a suitable time to enjoy food, but it was worth focusing on the process. The monster also took care of food for his comrade Amoeba, and saw that he was absorbed by everything that they provided him without sorting out. The amorphous was distracted by the observation of the amoeba because the guests finally granted him. the monster of the ability, and realized that judging by the steps in the next compartment, there were two people, and one of them was a soldier, and the second was a researcher. The amorphous even amused, because a whole detachment could not cope with him and what to say for only two people. The soldier and researcher went into the compartment, and all surprise could be seen on their faces. They could not understand what happened here and who could create this, but the most important thing for what all this is for. The soldier looked at all these thickets and saw that all this reminded him of some roots. The monster decided to attack the soldier, but he tried with the help of his weapon at least somehow to defend himself, but it was unsuccessfully. The amorph was pleased with his work as he skillfully and quickly was able to destroy his opponent. He went on, and his next goal was the same researcher who was very scared. The amorphous suddenly stopped and froze due to the fact that Amo gave him that he was hurt. The monster tried to understand what was the matter, and having considered everything, he finally understood the reason. He guessed that this researcher apparently took part in the experiments on the amoeba, and the amoeba should be angry due to the fact that the person who mocked him was now right before his eyes. Amorphous thought and decided that this amoeba, in principle, was also able to destroy people. The monster provided amoeba with such an opportunity that he could answer for all those moments when experiments were conducted on him and harm. He allowed him to send this man to the next world. The amorphous thought about what was experiencing pity for that soldier, whose soldier was destroyed instantly, or to that researcher who was destroyed more painfully. The monster was of such an opinion that sooner or later they went to the next world and did not see anything like that. After all this, he saw a system notification and realized that luck was still on his side. He was glad that he was able to achieve his goal much faster than he thought. The monster received a notification that a strong body was now available to him, and his consent was required in order to unlock this type. The monster, of course, thought about the fact that he destroyed about 500 samples, but received only 3 characteristics for this. However, it was not so bad to get this type either. The amorphous thought about whether he should unlock this type right now, or is better to hesitate. The monster was distracted by the amoeba and asked him to wait a bit because he needed to do something. The amorphous pondered everything to the decision that he should probably agree and therefore confirmed the unlocking of this type. A few minutes after the monster confirmed the unlocking with his body, some changes began to occur. Amev looked carefully at his comrade and said that now he became very large. The amorphous spoke that he simply grew up, but the amoeba could not understand the meaning of these words. The monster explained the meaning to him and said that it was when the baby becomes an adult. Amoeba, the word cub, implied as a baby, and this word and his meaning were familiar to him. The amoeba began to jump on the spot with joy and repeat that the baby became more over and over again, only the monster did not quite understand why the baby says. The amorphous thought decided that if we consider this stage from the point of view of immaturity, then there is a share of truth in the bars of the amoeba. The monster watched his comrade and concluded that he was quite smart, and decided for himself that he would definitely explain everything when he grows up. The amorph understood that in any case, now his body is stronger and became harder and harder. He felt because if the leopard suddenly became a rhino. The monster examined his body more carefully, and noticed that it increased very much in height, and his limbs were covered with dense armor. The amorphous drew attention to the fact that there was much more power in his leg. He now decided to check his characteristics, and saw that he began to have a natural restoration, and he also had a saw's tentacle and the ability of a polluting coating. The monster guessed that its natural restoration merged with vitality, and after that, the combined skill of regeneration formed. He was not very glad that the penalty for the type left much to be desired. He could receive an unlimited number of types, however, with obtaining a new requirement for others each time increase in 2. This is if he initially received the type of strong psyche. Then for a strong body he needed not 10 characteristics, but 20. The amorph understood that if he were in the game, then he would first think about him. However, the crisis was not far off, and nothing could be done about it. He decided that he would postpone the following type for later. To begin with, he needed to test the characteristics obtained, and these were the tentacles of the saw, which in themselves were very ambiguous and weak. The monster could not help but notice that these tentacles of saws after improvement became much stronger. He decided that the next in line will be the ability to pollute. He tried and understood with this ability to use others. The monster could now even form disputes that secreted acid. The monster decided that, thanks to this ability, he could now turn the ship into a whole fortress, because this ability was ideally suited to combat a strong rival. The amorphous checked all his new abilities and decided that he could now move on. Amoeba has always been next to him, and now wanted to know where they were heading, and the monster replied that their next goal is an hangar. The monster was wondering what reaction of the crew of the ship was to see it in such a guise. He was curious to know whether they would have to cry or ran to the rescue capsules. He decided that, in principle, He could now see everything. The monster was close to the truth since people began to scatter as soon as they noticed him. Some guys were in a hurry to hide as quickly as they could, and one of them decided that they would not wait for anyone else. The same person, after they went into the next compartment, ordered to immediately close the doors. He saw his colleague froze near the castle because his fear was so great that he paralyzed all his movements. The guy with anger pushed his colleague, frightened by his, and decided that he himself would take up the door closing. When the doors were practically closed, suddenly, a huge paw of the monster climbed into a small gap. The monster was not going to miss his prey so easily, and was very decisively configured. The amorphous slowly but confidently approached his goal, and horror froze on people's faces. They asked him not to approach them, and some were desperately shouted and called for help, but everything was to no avail since the monster was not going to regret anyone, and soon sent them all to the next world. The ship was in open space, and no one even had a concept of what events have occurred in it lately. The person who was in a special capsule for health restoration could not open his eyes, but he heard everything, and at the moment, he was very worried that there was complete silence around. He did not hear the voice of the doctors, and did not understand what was happening. The researcher was this man, and it was he who suffered greatly when attacking the monster in their operational room. He constantly thought for what he had all these suffering and torment, and also believed that in his case, it would be better to go to the other world than to exist. A researcher heard a certain noise that reminded him of the steps taken in military boots, and therefore he suggested that the soldier granted him. He suddenly thought and understood how mistaken in his guesses, because in some way he felt that not a man but a monster granted him. The amorphous approached the remote control and began to drive a certain combination on the keyboard that will help to carry out its plan. A man tried to understand what this creature did when he suddenly felt a pain that could not be compared with anything. He had the feeling that his whole body began to burn. He called to the rescue and asked that at least someone would alleviate his suffering, and was ready to go into the next world, but quickly and not so painful. 3 hours later, Amorph asked the amoeba whether he could eat well. The monster was still interested in what feelings Amoeba was experiencing after he could take revenge on his offender. Only now Amoeba did not understand the meaning of this word. The amorphous decided that apparently the number 26 did not experience such emotion, and therefore does not understand what he was talking about. He suggested that the amoeba was so possible and was born well, or he just did not realize what it was. The monster was still curious why this creature was so interested in scientists, because he was not at all able to turn into a sea demon. He knew that the sea demon lives only on the planets of the oceans, and that the length is more than 25 meters, and was also equipped with tentacles. Users found some similarity between him and Amuya, and treated with suspicion. The monster was also aware that the developer himself did not really want to work out this character, and he was written figuratively speaking on the knee. However, it was already a reality, and anything could be expected. Amoeba continued to call his comrade a baby, and informed him that he had already eaten very much. The monster turned his attention to the amoeba that lurked on his shoulder and looked very tired. The amorphous watched everything that happened around him, and was pleased with the work done. He was proud and rejoiced in that his construction of the nest went clearly according to the plan without any deviations. The monster decided for himself that in this case he should go further for his next prey. There was a ship in open space, and these were the surroundings with 08 where the cartel Dvara dominated. On this vessel, someone was intensively called to the rescue. The girl was held by certain creatures, and at that moment she asked her groom to save her. The groom of this girl looked very frightened, but everyone demanded that these creatures immediately remove their hands from her. These guys of a very strange appearance decided to eliminate excess noise and therefore, without any hesitation, destroyed this groom. One of them ordered his so-called team to pick up everything that those had and not miss anything valuable. They also decided that all men will be destroyed, and women are used for their own purposes. No one even dared to doubt the correctness of this decision because it was their credo. The head of this cartel had an interesting appearance, and he ordered to bring one of the people to him, and all because he did not like his expression on his face. This man almost immediately began to beg for mercy of the appearance of the wild beast. Their head of the cartel got angry because he did not like their prey, which, in his opinion, was too small. One of the people suddenly turned to him and began to be indignant that they generally hired him for his protection, and he turned out to betray them. The head of the cartel, in response, only snorted and said that they were not friends with him, so that he was holding his own promises. He also said that, in principle, it was all obvious, because who was to blame that he decided to simply give the money to some strangers, and he also believed that all the people from Megacorp were too stupid. The man did not expect this, and hoped that the National Guard had already received a distress signal, and goes here, and as soon as they appear here, they would immediately eliminate these villains. The head of the cartel did not particularly react to all these threats, and generally thought that all these miserable people were unworthy even to go to the next world, and thought that it would be better to turn them into mutants of Hulks. He concluded from the captain's words that people in Megacorp generally knew little about mercenaries, and therefore kindly decided to explain again. The head of the cartel said that if suddenly the mercenary gives his employer during an agreement, then this is a serious crime by their law. But if there are no witnesses to everyone, and there is no one to judge. He added that in vain, in general, the captain of this ship called the National Guard, because no one simply could tell anything to them. The captain, after hearing all this, finally realized that they want to send them all to the next world. The head replied that he personally was unknown to such noble expression, but he could say one thing for sure. He added only that he simply loves to wield his weapons and destroy everyone who comes across the eye from Megacorp. The chapter appeared before everyone, and the entire composition was reported that their boss arrived. At the same moment, the whole team bowed their heads low and greeted him. He gave the team permission to take everything that they wanted, and added that they would not limit them in actions. The boss decided to inform everyone that they today have another task that they will need to complete. He decided that so far it was not to talk about it, and ordered him to bring a person with the nickname of Chesnovich. The boss was thoughtful and a little upset, and all because he was surrounded by stupid people. He was so gone thought that he did not immediately notice the presence of those whom he himself called, until his genuine announced that the garlic arrived. The girl in large glasses looked very modest and slightly shy, and was ready to fulfill the instructions of her boss. The boss called the girl as he wanted to know what news was about their work. She said that today a meeting was held that was organized through a friend, but for some reason he stopped in touch. The boss got angry and thereby scared the girl slightly, but taking his emotions under control, he demanded an explanation. The girl said that there was a request from the research vessel of Captain Samuel that it was necessary to pick up a man who had already gone into the next world. The boss was surprised when he heard Samuel for his family and did not understand what they had forgotten here. The girl was also slightly puzzled because their boss was familiar with them. The boss considered it obvious that he was familiar with the representative of capital from the Titanium, and he also wanted someone who was the person who went to the next world. The girl answered her boss that it was a representative of noble capital from the Eugene family. She also said that in their last message it was said that for this business they were ready to pay 1 million loans. The head of the cartel, hearing about all this, considered those just madmen. The boss thought that it all came down to the fact that someone clearly thought the plan and something strange was happening inside Megacorp. There were rumors that the offspring of the genus Egerton from Mars challenged the family of Eugene, who was a certain king of the Earth. The chapter was aware of the fact that Egerton was officially engaged in the development of ships, but if unofficially, they were engaged in genetic modifications. The man who went to the next world was a representative of the Eugene family, and this person was most likely modified. He thought about selling the body of the deceased genus Egerton for a large amount. The boss was sure that this family would definitely want to get the body of the deceased, even if the cost exceeds 10 million loans. He became more fun because he felt the smell of money. The boss still really wanted to get even with Rod Egerton for turning him into a mutant, but as they say, resentment and the day is money. The boss turned to the girl to learn more about the lost connection with the informant. He wanted to know for what reason this happened and suggested that perhaps they were attacked, but the girl was not sure of that. He then suggested that the pigs were possible in their area, and, although he did not know who they were, but he was aware that they were rather brave. Therefore, he decided that as soon as they finish here, immediately after they will go to the ship of Samuel. The boss told everyone to prepare to track their signal. The boss considered it the right decision to destroy the ship, and ordered this to be done immediately, and all in order for all their traces on this ship to be destroyed. For this action, his team was prepared by a special bomb that could destroy a lot. Sometime after the boss and his team left the ship, that was the big explosion that completely covered the entire ship. The monster was in one of his nests and suddenly felt something and realized that the guests arrived. For his purposes, Amorph applied his abilities and established a connection with the whole ship. Due to his abilities, the monster realized that these guests broke the side of the ship, and all in order to make a dock. He also turned his attention to graffiti and realized that this ship belonged to Space Dog. The boss team, using their weapons, could melt the metal, and thereby discovered a passage for itself. They went one after another, and each of them was armed and ready for any situations. The monster watched them all this time and realized that these guys, as soon as they could get to the ship, decided to immediately go to the bridge. Although they were professionals in their field, their actions for the Amorphous were still consistent. The Amorphous tried to understand for himself how smart these guys were, because intelligent creatures would immediately consider this ship strange. The monster realized that most likely these guys blinded greed like those who hunt for treasures. They were very similar in this regard. The team went inside and was taken aback since none of them was ready to see something similar. They immediately reported to their boss that the bridge was successfully captured, but also reported that something very strange was happening on this bridge. The team handed it to their boss that for some reason there was no one on this ship, and many of some trees grew everywhere. The The boss did not understand what kind of trees in general are talking about, and where to come from plants in outer space. He thought that his subordinates were simply making fun of him. One of the people replied that they tell the truth, and then the boss decided that he would be much better if he personally checked everything himself. The amorph at this time scanned his guests, and saw that two had an improved heart and mechanical devices with high performance. Looking around another guest, the monster immediately realized that it was their boss and it was a mutant Hulk. The amorphous decided to check the rest and saw a man of the insect whose body could distinguish pheromone. He still turned his attention to the Star Union cyborg, who instead of the heart was installed, the device was installed. The monster appreciated this very peculiar cartel. More recently, he thought that he was in a very difficult position, because for evolution, he needed to destroy 10 representatives of another race. But these arriving pirates facilitated his task. Amorph suddenly turned his attention to another member of their cartel and was surprised as this girl was an ordinary person. The monster scanned it with his abilities, and he had the feeling that he had a computer instead of a brain. But at the same time, the girl behaved quite normal. The amorph did not know what surprises he should expect from this person, but he knew exactly what he should be very careful with. Amoeba saw that his comrade Kid was going somewhere, and immediately wanted to find out where exactly that one. The monster replied that he needed to deal with a certain problem, but Amo was ordered to stay here because it was too dangerous outside. The monster also said that an amoeba, and here could be very useful, and asked to protect a certain thing that he took from the pirates. Amoeba did not understand what this thing was, but the monster said that it was very important, and it would definitely come in handy. Number 26 replied that to responsibly complete the task entrusted to him. The monster rushed as soon as possible as soon as he could well understood that it was his perfect chance. While the pirates weakened vigilance, he needed to destroy the source of the enemy battleship in order to block the path to retreat. He knew that the pirates were very greedy, and therefore they would want to protect both the research vessel and their battleship. The monster suggested that for this, they would most likely go into 2 detachments. The monster decided that the hunt would begin as soon as his opponent would divide, just like some time ago entered this ship. He had a feeling that there was no security system and at all, but he knew that he should not forget that he was dealing with pirates. He thought that the pirates never assumed that they could be robbed. He remembered that he found a nuclear editor who was very close from here. The monster examined everything and noticed that everything looked in principle very good, except of course those robots of the humanoids of Android. He knew that these robots would immediately warn the central system as soon as he attacks them. The amorphous tried to come up with a plan so that thanks to this, he could pass by them and not get caught. The monster decided that for the beginning, he could afford to simply enjoy someone and considered this idea simply wonderful. The amorphous quietly hid around the corner so that no one could notice him and waited for his own prey. He looked more closely and saw that 2 were heading in his direction. One of them was an ordinary person and another insect person. The monster decided that it could have fun well with these 2, and therefore, without delay, he began to attack those. He was much stronger and more agile than these 2, and approached one guy planning to send him to the next world. A man of insect could not do anything and simply stood and watched how they destroy one of the members of his team. But at the same time, he remembered the radio and was going to pass this important information to his boss. The monster did not give such an opportunity and attacked a man insect planning and send this to the next world. A man of the insect did not expect such an outcome of events and was slightly dumbfounded, and the monster at that time did not lose time in vain and was going to finish what he had begun. The mutant still hoped for salvation and even called for help, but he had no chance to cope with Amor. The amorphous, as it suggested earlier, realized that the use of an alien species did not help to make up for everything for its evolution. Suddenly, the radio received a message so that the patrol was made to feel felt and explained for what reason he did not get in touch. The amorph took advantage of the ability to copy the voice of his last victim and replied that everything was in order. He received another message, in which it was said that it was enough for an insect to a person to just cool, and ordered him to get down to business. The monster at this time was already trying to access the closed ones that I saw the doors in front of him. After some time, the amorphous was able to open and enter the inside, and it was given to him everything quite easily. He decided for himself, for the future, that he should no longer fight and spend his strength on Android. The monster was almost 100% sure that the thing he needed is somewhere here. He used his poison that corroded almost any surface, and still could find what he was looking for. The monster was sure that a person would immediately be able to notice, but since he dealt with androids, everything was a little different. All this was due to the fact that the androids were not prepared to solve unexpected incidents. The amorphous was pleased with the engine's issue was already resolved, and it was very important for him. At this time, the dispatch in the radio requested reinforcement because the monster broke their door. The one who was in the control room heard that they did not have enough people to send a detachment to their aid, and this greatly outraged them. They were also informed that their group leader was destroyed, and this news only more brought chaos into the dispatch, because they began to realize that soon everyone would go to the next world. The boss watched all this from the video of the observation, and at all could not understand what was happening there. His whole team looked at what previously happened in the control room, and none of them was ready for this. The boss tried to understand what was happening on this ship at all, but still could not figure it out. He began to think that this ship was like some kind of ghost ship because there were only plants everywhere and no signs of people. The boss decided that for a start, they should find out more about the attacker, and therefore he asked his man to reproduce the video from the ship. They saw frightening images on which all crew members were with some wounds and a clearly damaged psyche. The boss realized that not a single person on this ship was in an adequate state, and now he tried to understand what all these people fought. He asked his man to still reproduce something from the past, and saw how a man ordered someone to immediately go back as soon as he finished repaired the gearbox. Boss, looking at one of the men, immediately realized that he was most likely for those who were responsible for the protection of this ship. He looked at another man in uniform and guessed that he should be Yusen Samuel. The boss was watching the record concluded that apparently their entire labor force failed, and all the highest leadership was in panic. He even drew attention to the fact that the creature attacked his victim from above. From all this, it turned out that this creature most likely had reason, and it was a very dangerous monster with a high level of intelligence. The boss previously worried about how he would behave with Yujin's family, and now he decided that he should have taken care to return his body safe in safety. He decided to turn to the girl and called her Manuel, and only one of his vote forced her to freeze in place. The boss raised his voice and called the girl again, and this time she already reacted properly. He decided all the same to find out about the lost connection, and the girl replied that their original plan was to meet yesterday. She told boss that the ship never arrived, and therefore they were looking for him all day. The boss said that he had largely able to figure out the details of the research vessel while he was heading here, and the whole problem was that they could not find out what kind of creature this was. He believed that despite all this, they still managed to penetrate this ship silently, and this monster most likely did not even know what they are here. The boss considered it a correct decision that they should find this creature and destroy, and only after that, they will be able to go look for the body of the deceased. He was unexpectedly killed and hastened to report that they had a problem, and, after these words, a man hesitated, fearing to voice this problem in ear. The man still gathered his spirit and reported to the boss that their engine was broken. The boss could not believe in what he heard, and did not understand how the engine could be broken if it recently worked completely normally. His subordinate said that the engine is completely melted and therefore they cannot fix it in great regret. The boss perfectly understood whose hands it was, and was angry because this creature dared to spoil his ship. He, due to the fact that he could no longer restrain his emotions with all the anger, hit the stone and thereby frightened the girl very much. The boss turned to Manuel and decided to find out if she could control the ship. The girl was not completely sure of this, and said that she needed to check. The girl did not quite arrange his answer, and because of the surging emotions, he hit again, and later even a small explosion sounded. The girl realized her mistake and hastened to correct this situation and answered her boss that she could deal with all this. The boss ordered 3 members of his team to help the girl to figure out all this, and the rest reported that they would go with him and find this monster. He told everyone to rush, otherwise then he personally deal with them personally. The Amorph was all this time in his cocoon and carefully watched the pirates using his abilities. The monster was glad of the picture that he was able to consider, because he still managed to get the captain of this cartel out of himself. The Amorph understood that the pirates did not know that there are still those who could survive on this ship. There were about 20 of these people, and all of them were hidden here and there, including captain and higher leadership. The monster suddenly even decided to spare these people even for himself. He understood that there would also be a battle due to the fact that MangaCapped does not really complain of pirates. He already decided for himself that while those who were able to survive will fiercely fight with pirates, he will simply use it. The monster saw that there were currently 3 pirates in the wheelhouse and a woman who tried to impersonate normal. The Amorphous realized that this was his good chance to attack, but only he had a bad foreboding about this. His instinct of Amorph warned that this woman was extremely dangerous, and he suddenly suggested that she may be the mistress of that Arnold. The Amorph remembered the words of this Arnold when he said that he saw a monster in front of him who could use many abilities, and this reminds him of his mistress Eugene Ayen. The monster suddenly thought and tried to understand that in that mistress he forced Arnold to say that they were similar, but she reminds him of a genetically modified person. He took into account the fact that this woman was from the noble capital of Megacaps, who was obsessed with the fact that their life lasted as long as possible, because there was a high probability that she was changed much more than Kisaragi Yujin. The monster thought about the fact that if a woman was changed to the player's level, it would most likely be very difficult to overcome even if he evolves to a young individual. The Amorph understood that a lot of time has passed since he last fought with a genetically modified person. To see such a strong opponent at the same time scared and excited him.